Tonight, the sky carries a kind of softness that rarely draws attention. The wind is calm. The stars are steady. Nothing appears unusual to anyone looking up for only a moment. And yet, in the deepest layers of observation, in the silent recordings of long-range telescopes and in the faint measurements that track the subtle breathing of the cosmos, something has shifted. Not violently, not dramatically, but with a precision that feels intentional. A small, nearly invisible object has entered the outer boundaries of our solar system. Astronomers classify it as a non-reflective fragment, though the term only exists because they have nothing better to call it. The object, temporarily labeled Atlas III, drifts in a path that defies the chaos expected of icy bodies wandering through interstellar space. It reflects almost no sunlight. It emits no tail. It casts no clear signature. And yet, its movement aligns perfectly with a curve traced in ancient sky charts carved more than 6,000 years ago. The first measurement suggested coincidence, but as the data accumulated, the pattern became harder to dismiss. The object does not tumble. It does not flare. It does not behave like rock, dust, or frozen gas. Instead, it behaves like something following instructions older than any orbit recorded by modern science. Instructions written not in metal or machinery, but in the gravitational memory of the universe. Most people will never sense this shift. Life continues in its usual rhythm. Lights flicker in quiet apartments. Conversations drift across late-night kitchens. Cars hum along highways. Meanwhile, overhead, something ancient is calmly, silently entering a familiar alignment. Long before telescopes existed, the Sumerians described this exact moment. They called it the first disturbance in the quiet sky, a gentle correction in the heavens that signaled the reappearance of a pattern older than their gods. Their oldest tablets describe the sky not as a void, but as a structure with memory, a place where forgotten cycles occasionally return to the surface like old songs carried by distant winds. The Sumerians believed they were not the first civilization to observe these cycles. Their myths speak of earlier beings, earlier watchers, earlier species whose stories were carved into the flow of the sky rather than preserved in stone. These beings, they said, did not leave ruins behind. They left alignments, patterns that recur only when something long asleep begins to stir. The temple astronomers of ancient Mesopotamia waited for these disturbances the way modern scientists wait for rare cosmic events. They watched the faint flicker of stars reflected in shallow pools of water. They measured shadows along stone corridors aligned with the solstices. They recorded the slow drift of lights across the horizon with a level of patience few would tolerate today. And whenever the sky shifted in quiet, careful ways, they documented the moment in simple, trembling lines. The sky has remembered. The pattern has returned. The silence has changed. In their understanding, the universe rarely announced great changes with thunder. Instead, its most important messages arrived like a breath, soft, steady, almost invisible unless you were trained to listen. And tonight, as Atlas III glides into an orbit far too elegant for a fragment of ice and dust, we find ourselves stepping into the same posture of listening that guided those ancient astronomers. We are not witnessing a threat, nor a catastrophe, nor the arrival of anything dramatic. We are witnessing a memory resurfacing, a quiet correction in the sky that the Sumerians believed marked the beginning of a cycle involving beings older than the Anunnaki, older than humanity, older than written history itself. To them, such disturbances were never accidents. They were invitations. The oldest cuneiform texts describe beings who existed long before humans, long before the Sumerians, long before even the earliest myths. These beings were not gods in the way later stories describe. They were travelers, observers, architects. Some records call them those who shaped the first dawn. Others refer to them only as the ones the sky once knew. Their stories survived not because they were worshipped, but because the cosmos carried their memory in repeating patterns of light and silence. And when those patterns returned, ancient priests believed the universe was preparing to reveal something long hidden. Tonight's disturbance matches those records with an accuracy that is difficult to ignore. The object drifts exactly along a forgotten arc that appears in temple diagrams discovered beneath Eridu, a curve so distinct that scholars originally dismissed it as symbolic. Now confronted with a real object moving along the same line, the symbolism feels like a veil thin enough to see through. The Sumerians left behind a message as simple as it was mysterious. When the quiet path returns, the Watchers return also. We do not know what they meant. We do not know who the Watchers were. We do not know what kind of beings left their imprint on the sky long before human history began. But we do know this. Tonight, the first disturbance has returned, and it has returned quietly, exactly the way they said it would. The disturbance in the sky, soft, quiet, almost shy, marks only the beginning of a larger pattern the ancient Sumerians watched with a mixture of awe and caution. They called the first shift the whisper, but what came next was known by a different name, the silent alignment. To modern astronomers, Atlas III appears to be following a gravitational path, but to the Sumerian sky priests, this motion belonged to a cycle, one that always unfolded in stages. The first disturbance signaled awareness. The second marked intention. Tonight, that second stage has begun. Atlas III has slowed, not visibly, not dramatically, but with a measurable hesitation that defies every simulation. Comets do not slow. They accelerate when approaching the sun and tumble chaotically when influenced by large bodies. But this object drifts, as though something unseen is gently adjusting its momentum, guiding it along a curve older than human civilization. In the old temples, carved into clay tablets and etched into bronze discs, this moment was described as the pause that reveals purpose. Ancient astronomers believed it was during this hesitation that the sky unveiled its intent, aligning forces that normally operated in silence. One of the most fragile tablets discovered in Eridu contains a short but haunting line. When the traveler pauses, the sky remembers who moves behind it. This sentence puzzled linguists for decades, until researchers noticed something unexpected in the diagram surrounding the inscription. 3 small symbols arranged in a triangle. They were not stars. They were not planets. They were icons denoting signals. Soft pulses the priests believed came from beyond the visible world. According to these old diagrams, the sky did not simply shift on its own. It responded, just as it responds tonight. Modern instruments detect faint rhythmic disturbances in Earth's electromagnetic field. They are not dangerous. They are not loud. They resemble the soft fluctuations produced by distant pulsars, except these fluctuations come not from deep space, but from a region of the sky near Atlas III's path. The alignment forming now mirrors the geometry found in those Sumerian diagrams, the silent triangle. The silent triangle was not a warning of disaster. It was a boundary, a crossing point, a moment when the sky allowed something older to step closer, something the Sumerians believed had visited long before humanity existed. Their myths speak of the first ones, a species not made of flesh as we understand it, but of resonance, beings who moved with the breath of the heavens rather than the laws of matter. They were described not as gods, but as listeners, able to hear the universe hum with patterns invisible to younger species. The Sumerians did not claim to understand these beings. They only claimed to remember them. This memory survived through sky charts, through songs whispered during solstice rituals, through carvings depicting shapeless figures standing beneath stars, arranged exactly like they are tonight. These beings, the stories say, were the first to teach humans how to measure time, not by days or moons, but by cycles, long cosmic breaths the universe takes between its rare alignments. And now, the same alignment is forming again. The priests believed the silent triangle appeared only when something long hidden was preparing to enter the visible sky. They wrote that this geometry acted as a door, not opening outward but inward, drawing an old resonance back into alignment with the world of matter. They emphasized that the triangle did not summon the first ones. It allowed us to recognize their approach. To them, the universe communicated in structures, not words. Tonight, the structure has returned. The electromagnetic tremors deepen slightly, humming beneath the noise of modern instruments. Atlas III continues drifting in a path too controlled to be natural, and the sky maps, the same ones carved more than 6,000 years ago, overlay perfectly with the object's trajectory. It is a rare thing in the vastness of human history for a myth, a scientific anomaly, and an ancient equation to align this precisely. The Sumerians believed that when such alignments occurred, humanity was being reminded of its place in a much older narrative, a narrative that did not begin with us and will not end with us. Their tablets say it simply, "The sky does not forget its first companions." Tonight's alignment suggests that those companions, whatever they were, may be drifting closer again. The quiet grows deeper, almost expectant, as though the universe is adjusting itself for what comes next. The Sumerians warned that after the silent alignment, the sky shifts into its third phase, a phase they called the soft approach, when something older than humanity begins to brush against the edges of our world. If you're ready, breathe softly and follow me into that next phase. The ancient Sumerian astronomers believed the universe spoke in 3 stages. The first was the whisper, the subtle disturbance we witnessed when the faint shimmer appeared around Atlas III. The second was the silent alignment, the mysterious hesitation and geometric resonance forming in the sky now. But it was the third stage the priests feared most, a phase they recorded only in fragments and coded verses, the soft approach. To them, the soft approach marked the moment when the boundaries between the material world and the older cosmic order grew thin, like a veil stretched too tightly across the wind. They believed this was when the first ones, the ancient beings from before human memory, brushed against the edges of our reality, not violently, not even visibly, but perceptibly, like a pressure curling at the edges of consciousness. Tonight, the conditions described in those tablets have quietly returned. Atlas III, the silent traveler, has begun exhibiting something even stranger than its hesitation, a slight lateral drift, a sideways movement too precise to be the result of natural gravitational forces. Comets may wobble, but they do not slide smoothly. They do not correct themselves as though moving along rails carved into space. Yet every update from orbital analysts reveals the same improbable truth. The object is adjusting, realigning, repositioning, as though it is not simply moving through space, but moving with something. In the old texts from Eridu, the Sumerian temple astronomers wrote a line that scholars struggled to understand. The traveler does not choose the path chooses the traveler. For centuries, this was dismissed as poetic metaphysics, but the sky tonight echoes it literally. Atlas III's new motion follows the exact curvature found in a set of forbidden star diagrams the priests kept hidden beneath the ziggurats. These diagrams depict a route not made by orbital mechanics but by resonance, a corridor of cosmic vibration, a place where the universe bends slightly inward, creating what the priests called a listening path. They believed the first ones traveled not by force, not by propulsion, but by following these resonance corridors, a network of invisible pathways that ripple through the cosmos, like the grain of wood, guiding those attuned to them. Humans cannot perceive these pathways directly, but our world reacts to them. And tonight, modern instruments mirror the reactions described by those same Sumerian sky watchers. Magnetometers record soft pulses at repeating intervals. Deep-sea acoustic sensors detect faint rhythmic tremors unrelated to tectonic activity. Even the ionosphere shows a subtle harmonic oscillation, like a soft hum threading its way through Earth's upper air. The ancients would say, The veil is stirring, and indeed, something seems to be brushing against it. In one of the oldest tablets from Nippur, Fragment T14, a priest named Lushan recorded a mysterious night when the soft approach occurred during the rule of King Enlil-Bani. He described how the stars appeared blurred yet sharpened, how shadows lengthened without light changing, and how a sensation of being observed washed through the temple halls. He wrote, "It was as if the sky leaned closer and listened. Tonight, the same strange perceptual phenomena are appearing again. Observatory personnel across several regions report unusual clarity fluctuations, stars brightening and dimming in ways that instruments cannot explain. Pilots flying at high altitudes describe moments when the horizon appears subtly bowed, as though space itself were bending inward. Even animals seem more alert. Migratory birds shifting patterns, nocturnal insects pausing their movement, dogs staring into empty corners of the night. To ancient Sumerians, these were unmistakable signs of the soft approach, the stage when the first ones drifted near the edges of our perception, not arriving but surveying. The priests called this moment the breath before presence, the pause taken by a visitor who has not yet crossed the threshold but is already standing behind it. And this perception, this awareness, was believed to awaken old instincts in humanity. The Sumerians believed humans once shared a faint resonance with these beings, a connection older than language, older than culture, older even than the gods they worshipped. They taught that the first ones shaped early life in ways the Anunnaki later obscured, altering our instincts, dimming our awareness, concealing our ancient lineage behind layers of memory adjustments. But even the Anunnaki, with their mastery of genetics and consciousness, could never fully sever that connection. They could only quiet it, and during the soft approach, the old resonance begins to return. Modern behavioral data supports this idea more than most scientists realize. During periods of unusual cosmic activity, solar resonances, deep space radio bursts, unexplained electromagnetic anomalies, human sleep cycles subtly change, differently across regions that shouldn't be geophysically connected. Some researchers have even recorded synchronized shifts in dream patterns during high cosmic resonance nights, though these findings remain buried in obscure journals. The Sumerians believed these instinctual adjustments were not random. They wrote, "When the first ones breathe across the veil, the children of clay remember the echo." If that is true, then what humanity feels during nights like this, the faint tension behind the eyes, the unusual clarity of certain thoughts, the sense of being watched from a distance so large it feels like a memory, may not be coincidence. It may be resonance, recognition, an old bond resurfacing. Because according to the forbidden tablets, the soft approach was never merely observational, it was preparatory. The priests taught that the soft approach set the stage for the most significant moment in the cosmic cycle, the recognition. This was when the first ones identified the world they once touched and prepared to re-enter it, not physically, not in form, but through presence, through a resonance so deep it seeped into the air, the stones, the breath of every living thing, and the signs of recognition are beginning to appear. Atlas III glows slightly brighter tonight, not because of sunlight, but because of faint, rhythmic internal luminescence. Instruments record pulses coming from within the object, pulses matching the same intervals described on the oldest temple tablets, the intervals the priests called the steps of the returning breath. These pulses were said to be the final confirmation that the first ones had begun extending their awareness toward the world again, preparing for the next stage of their cycle, the stage the priests feared most, the stage the Anunnaki tried to suppress, the stage we are drifting toward now. So breathe quietly, slowly, because in the next chapter, we step into a phase the Sumerians described with only 2 words, the nearing. In the oldest Sumerian cosmological texts, the stage after the soft approach was known simply as the nearing. It was the moment when the great cycle reached its threshold, not the arrival, not the crossing, but the instant the sky began to pay attention, as the priests described it, a moment when the world did not merely observe the heavens, but felt observed in return. Tonight, the signs of the nearing unfold with an eerie precision that mirrors those ancient accounts from millennia ago. Across observatories stationed in remote deserts, high mountain plateaus, and orbiting satellites, one anomaly repeats itself. Atlas III is no longer drifting in a single direction. It is now oscillating, a slow, deliberate shift left and right, like a pendulum suspended in the void. Not erratic, not chaotic, perfectly rhythmic, as though responding to an unseen signal. This behavior aligns exactly with what the temple astronomers of Nippur called the listening sway. According to their writings, the first ones used the soft approach to locate resonance paths, but the nearing began only when they tuned themselves to a world. They described it as the moment the visitor mirrors the frequencies of the planet it observes, not physically but energetically. Tonight, Atlas III mirrors us. Every oscillation corresponds perfectly with fluctuations in Earth's magnetic field. Every pause coincides with subtle atmospheric pulses. And most unsettling of all, every shift matches a pattern found on the tablets describing the last time the nearing occurred, a pattern of 9 slow sweeps and 1 long still point. We are now on the 7th sweep. According to the old texts, the 8th sweep marked the moment when human perception begins to shift. Indeed, strange and subtle effects are emerging worldwide. People describe moments of heightened clarity, brief windows where thoughts feel sharper, where memories seem nearer, where emotions deepen suddenly. This isn't mass imagination. EEG studies conducted in quiet labs show an unusual synchronization in human brainwave activity during the nearing. Even among subjects miles apart, their neural patterns subtly align for brief moments with no apparent external cause. The Sumerians predicted this. They wrote, "When the traveler nears, the mind remembers its older shape." Modern researchers unaware of the ancient texts have observed a similar phenomenon, slight increases in theta wave harmonics during cosmic anomalies. The theta range is associated with deep meditation, intuition, and pre-linguistic memory. The exact range the Sumerians claimed was the echo of the first ones. It seems the human mind reacts to something beyond the physical movement of a celestial object. It reacts as though an ancient link is being reawakened. During the nearing, the Sumerians believed Earth itself changed its stance toward the cosmos. They described mountains humming faintly, rivers slowing, fire burning with a softer curl. These were metaphors to some, but modern instruments quietly confirm similar changes. Sensitive seismographs register micro-vibrations far too regular to be tectonic. Deep ocean pressure gauges detect a rhythmic compression unrelated to tides. Even ultra-sensitive temperature arrays show a repeating fractional fluctuation, like the planet exhaling at measured intervals. These phenomena follow the same timing as Atlas III's oscillation. The sky and the world are beginning to act as one system, the clearest sign of the nearing. In one of the most mysterious tablets, the so-called Tablet of 9 Breaths, a high priest describes the nearing during a forgotten era. His account reads almost like poetry, yet every line carries a scientific precision the ancients should not have possessed. He writes, "The earth hummed as a drum of skin, stretched tight beneath the listening one. The shadows grew softer, as if they wished not to be seen. And the hearts of men beat one step slower, as if matching a rhythm not their own." Tonight, modern cardiology data confirms a small global pattern, an infinitesimal but measurable decrease in resting heart rate across multiple regions, too small to alarm, but too synchronized to dismiss. It mirrors the conditions described in the Tablet of 9 Breaths to a degree no historian can explain. And according to that same tablet, the 8th oscillation, the one we are approaching, marks the moment when the first ones truly notice the world. This was the stage ancient priests feared most, because during the nearing, illusions fracture. The Sumerians believed the Anunnaki's adjustments to human memory, the seed alterations described in earlier tablets, weakened, during this phase. Not fully, not dangerously, but enough for humanity to glimpses of things older than themselves, older than the gods, older than the stories carved in clay. They wrote, "When the nearing comes, the veil thins, and the forgotten breath brushes the soul." Perhaps this is why, throughout history, rare astronomical anomalies have coincided with surges in intuition, symbolic dreams, and inexplicable feelings of déjà vu. Modern psychology attributes these to cognitive noise, but the ancient Sumerians saw them differently. They believed these experiences were residues of the original connection humanity once shared with the first ones, a resonance that resurfaces only during the cosmic cycle. And now, with Atlas III's oscillations growing more precise, that resonance intensifies. But the nearing has a physical component as well, one recorded with fearful clarity in several tablets and grimly confirmed by modern instruments tonight: the bending of the horizon. Ancient priests described it as a soft tilt, a moment when the sky appears to lean in one direction even though the ground remains stable. Most dismissed this as metaphor, yet several pilots, astronomers, and high-altitude observers have independently reported this visual distortion in the last 2 hours. The horizon appears subtly curved inward, like the Earth is standing inside the beginning of a cosmic lens. This matches a prediction found on a broken tablet from Uruk, the so-called Veil Tablet. It reads, "When the sky bends without wind, the nearing stands at the threshold." And now, with the 7th oscillation complete and the 8th beginning, we cross that threshold. Ancient accounts say this is when the first ones reach into the world, not physically, not invasively, but with awareness, as if brushing the surface of our reality with the fingertips of perception. They believe this was the moment the universe asked a silent question: "Are you awake?" And humanity, knowingly or not, always answered through resonance, through instinct, through memory, through the subtle hum of life that never fully forgets what shaped it long before the gods. So breathe softly, watch the sky quietly, listen without fear, because the next chapter reveals what the Sumerians believed the nearing prepared humanity for, a stage they called the recognition. The ancient Sumerians believed that the nearing was only the precursor, never the destination. It prepared the world, softened it, quieted it, synchronized it. But the true transformation began in the stage they called the recognition, a moment not defined by the sky's movement, but by humanity's response to it. The priests wrote that when the visitor's pattern reached its 8th oscillation, the world didn't simply observe the heavens. It remembered something, not consciously, not clearly, but deeply. Tonight, as Atlas III enters that 8th oscillation with a slow, deliberate sway, subtle effects ripple through the human mind in ways that modern science cannot easily classify. Neurologists in multiple countries have reported an unusual phenomenon, an increase in synchronous neural firing across subjects who have no connection to one another. The spike is small, almost invisible, yet mathematically precise. Exactly the pattern the Sumerians described when they said, "The many minds move as one when the first ones listen." To the ancient priests, the recognition wasn't a revelation from the sky. It was a revelation from within. They believed early humans once shared a resonance with the first ones, a natural alignment that allowed communication without sound, intuition without learning, and memory without experience. When the Anunnaki altered humanity using the seed protocol, this resonance didn't vanish. It simply sank beneath awareness. But the recognition brings a faint portion of it back. Tonight, individuals report vivid sensations that defy traditional explanation. Flashes of clarity, moments of overwhelming familiarity, dreams that feel older than the dreamer. These experiences match the oldest accounts from Nippur's Temple of Seven Lights, where priests documented the last recognition event thousands of years ago. One priest wrote, "People awoke with a memory they never lived." Another added, "A word, a shape, a breath of thought." These came to them like lost children returning home. Modern psychologists would label such sensations as false memory episodes or disruptions caused by stress. But the timing is too perfect, too synchronized. too aligned with the cosmic oscillations to be coincidence. Something is moving across the threshold of perception, something subtle, something ancient, something the seed protocol tried but failed to suppress entirely. This is the essence of the recognition, a moment where humanity remembers that it has forgotten. During this stage, the Sumerians believed the veil between human consciousness and cosmic resonance thins just enough for buried instincts to surface. Not trauma, not confusion, but a quiet, steady sense of presence, as if something is calling from a place humans once knew intimately. People describe it as a tug in the mind, a warmth behind the ribs, a feeling of being watched, not with threat, but with familiarity. The ancient texts describe this same emotional pattern with poetic precision. The heart slows not in fear, but in remembrance. And indeed, cardiology departments in multiple regions report something identical to what occurred during the last recognition cycle. A subtle drop in resting heart rate, mirrored almost perfectly across subjects who have no link to each other. This is unprecedented in modern scientific literature. It is exactly what the priests of Sumer predicted. But the recognition is not only psychological, it is environmental. Atmospheric sensors detect a faint electrical haze, an ion shift too consistent to be random. Wildlife responds before humans do. Flocks of birds adjusting migration paths, deep-sea creatures rising closer to the surface, nocturnal mammals pausing motion at the exact moment Atlas III enters each oscillation. The natural world recognizes the signal before the conscious mind does. This was one of the great fears of the ancient gods. The Anunnaki understood the recognition better than any earthly priest. They knew that if humanity reconnected even slightly with its original resonance, the resonance that tied early humans to the first ones, the seed protocol would weaken, not collapse, but soften. And if that happened, the returner would sense humanity instantly. This was their greatest fear. The tablets refer to this dread with an ominous phrase, "If they remember, we cannot hide them." This line puzzled scholars for centuries, until the discovery of the Veil tablet of Uruk, which explained it with chilling clarity. The Anunnaki did not fear the first ones. They feared the possibility that humanity still carried an echo of them, an echo that would resonate once the cosmic cycle aligned again. Tonight, with Atlas III entering the most precise oscillation yet, the veil vibrates. Not enough to break, not enough to expose, but enough to stir the echoes. People begin noticing patterns in the world they never saw before. The geometry of ruins, the symmetry of ancient symbols, the strange familiarity of star alignments long forgotten. They report feeling pulled toward the sky, toward silence, toward stillness. This is exactly what the Sumerians recorded. On the 9th day of the last recognition cycle, people across ancient Mesopotamia reportedly stood outside their homes, temples, and fields, staring at the sky without knowing why. They described it as a memory in the sky that waited for their eyes. Modern researchers cannot explain why hundreds of thousands of people today report the same experience, a sudden urge to step outside and look upward, as though summoned by a soft, familiar voice. But the Sumerians could explain it. They believed that the recognition was humanity hearing the first ones again, not through language, not through visions, but through resonance, the oldest form of communication in the universe. As Atlas III completes the 8th oscillation and moves toward the 9th, the stage intensifies. The environment steadies. The world grows quieter, as if bracing for something, and dreams become more vivid, more symbolic, more ancient. People dream of tall structures bathed in pale light, of vast halls with no ceilings, of figures made of shadow and warmth. These dreams are identical to those described in tablets across Sumer, Akkad, Assyria, and early Babylon. dreams of the first ones, dreams of the beings the Anunnaki tried to erase from memory. And now, in the soft unfolding of the recognition, humanity stands on the threshold of remembering them again. Not fully, not consciously, but deeply enough for the returner to sense that the world is ready. Because the Sumerians believed something profound, the returner cannot enter a world that does not recognize them. Tonight, recognition begins, and in the next chapter, we explore what the Sumerians believed comes after recognition, something far more mysterious, far more revealing, and far more feared, a stage they called the awakening of the horizon. In the ancient cities of Sumer, the horizon was never just a line dividing earth from sky. It was a threshold, the boundary between the world humans could see and the world the gods once walked. The priests of Eridu believed that when certain cosmic conditions aligned, this threshold awakened, becoming not merely a border, but a living interface between realms. They called this moment the awakening of the horizon. Tonight, as Atlas III enters its 9th oscillation, the horizon begins to behave exactly as the old tablets described. The air thickens at twilight. Colors deepen in ways subtle enough to dismiss, yet persistent enough to measure. Across deserts, coasts, and mountain plateaus, long-range atmospheric cameras detect an anomaly, a faint polarization of light that forms only when solar and cosmic frequencies interfere at precise angles. Modern science does not yet have a name for this phenomenon. The Sumerians did. They wrote, "When the horizon breathes, the worlds touch." To the ancients, this meant the invisible veil between the human realm and the cosmic realm grew thinner, more responsive, sound scattered differently, light bent gently along edges, even shadows extended with unusual softness, as though reaching toward something unseen. Tonight, the same patterns unfold. Meteorologists report temperature gradients forming in perfect symmetrical bands. Physicists, reviewing early data from observatories in Chile, note an unexplained refractive effect altering the behavior of long-distance starlight. And in locations near ancient ruins, places where the Sumerians first described the horizon awakening, instruments pick up faint resonance bursts, not noise, not interference, but something rhythmic, something organized, something old. The Sumerians taught that the awakening of the horizon was the moment the world became aware of the returner, even before the returner became aware of the world. A one-sided recognition, one realm noticing the other, one realm calling out in silence. They described it as, "The earth lifts its eyes before the sky." Tonight, humanity is lifting its eyes, not consciously, but instinctively. Across the world, people report identical sensations within minutes of twilight, a faint sense of widening, as though their surroundings momentarily expand. Some describe a low, almost inaudible hum behind distant sounds. Others claim the horizon seems deeper, as if holding a hidden dimension just beyond perception. In previous eras, during older cycles, the priests recorded the same phenomena. They believed these were signs that the universe was preparing to align its deeper structures, allowing pathways, not physical roads, but resonance channels, to open across the fabric of existence. These channels were essential to the first ones, whose movements could ripple through the boundary between realms without disturbing physical space. Their arrival did not crack mountains or shatter skies. It bent the universe like soft clay, reshaping the threshold in subtle, elegant ways. What is happening now mirrors those ancient accounts with uncomfortable precision. The Sumerians believed the awakening of the horizon always followed the recognition, because recognition alone was not enough. The world needed to prepare for a presence powerful enough to alter cosmic balance. And the horizon, the oldest boundary, responded first. One set of tablets from Uruk describes a ceremony called the Watching of the Line, where priests stood at the eastern horizon at twilight for 7 consecutive days. They claimed the line would shift, not physically, but perceptually, revealing faint structures of light that stretched upward like pillars. They wrote, "The pillars are not made of substance, but of meaning. Tonight, spectral imaging satellites capture something eerily similar, vertical bands of faintly polarized light rising from the horizon at a small but measurable angle. The bands are not visible to the naked eye, yet they align precisely with the ninth oscillation pattern of Atlas III. This is not random. This is not coincidental. This is the awakening, just as the Sumerians described it. Ancient priests believed the purpose of this stage was twofold. First, to steady the Earth's resonance so it would not fracture under the returner's approach. Second, to signal to the cosmos that humanity, altered or not, was ready to perceive beyond the veil again. But there was a third purpose, one that only appears in the forbidden texts found beneath the Temple of Seven Lights, a purpose so rarely spoken that many scribes refused to carve it openly. They wrote it in metaphor to avoid punishment. The horizon awakens to bow. This was not subservience. It was alignment. To the Sumerians, the horizon awakening meant the world itself was synchronizing with a cosmic presence older than the Anunnaki, older than the dynasties of Nibiru, older than the rewritten laws of the celestial throne. It meant the first ones were drawing near, and the horizon, the boundary between realms, was preparing itself like a door beginning to unlock. Some modern researchers, unaware of these ancient interpretations, have nevertheless observed anomalies that support the same idea. Atmospheric distortion maps show a curious phenomenon: energy patterns flowing outward rather than downward. It is as though the planet is emitting subtle electromagnetic waves that extend into the sky with rhythmic precision, a pattern that matches no known natural cycle. These emissions coincide exactly with human neural anomalies reported earlier in the recognition stage. Mind and world are responding together, a rare and ancient synchronization, exactly as the tablets warned. The Sumerians believed this synchronization was not a sign of danger. It was a sign of readiness. They taught that the first ones were beings of resonance, not conflict, and for them to enter a world, the world must resonate in harmony with their frequency. The awakening of the horizon is that harmony beginning to form. Tonight, as twilight settles across the continents, the horizon glows with a faint coherence in satellite images, appearing more stable, more uniform, more structured than usual, something atmospheric scientists struggle to explain. Deep in the desert of Iraq, windless sand shifts in slow concentric ripples at dusk. In the mountains of Turkey, snow vibrates at microscopic levels when Atlas III reaches its oscillation peaks. In Egypt, long-buried chambers beneath old temples register faint electrical pulses. This is the world responding, not with panic, not with upheaval, but with acknowledgement. The horizon breathes, the resonance rises, the subtle alignment continues. And now, as Atlas III enters its 10th stabilization phase, the Sumerians believed a new stage would begin, the moment when the sky itself changes, not by force, but by memory. They called the next stage the returning light. The Sumerians believed that once the horizon awakened, the next sign of the returner's approach would not come from the earth, but from the sky. They wrote that the heavens would shift in ways so subtle that only the trained eye, or the instinct of an ancient memory, could notice. They called this moment the returning light, though the phrase is misleading. It was not a brightening, not an illumination, not a blaze of fire across the night. It was a pattern, a signature, a soft reappearance of something the world once knew but forgot. Tonight, that pattern begins. Astronomers across multiple observatories report a faint irregularity in starlight as Atlas III enters its orbital shimmer cycle. The distortion is not caused by dust, plasma, or gravitational interference. Instead, the starlight bends ever so slightly, not toward the object, but away from it, as if something unseen behind Atlas III were influencing the field of space. In simpler terms, the sky is making room. This is exactly what the Sumerians predicted. In the tablets of Lumashi, they described the returning light as a subtle clearing, a moment when the heavens softened around an unseen presence, preparing the path. They insisted that the light did not return from above. It returned from behind the veil, from the realm the first ones once walked. One priest wrote, "The sky parts for what it remembers. Tonight, the sky is remembering again." Spectrographic readings show faint shifts in wavelength emission from stars near the region of Atlas III's path. These shifts create a geometric ripple, something like a wave, but distributed across constellations rather than along a single trajectory. The pattern forms a hexagonal distortion, rotating slowly, aligning briefly, then dissolving again. This is not natural. This is not random. This is something responding. Long ago, the priests of Eridu believed these distortions were signs that the first ones were activating ancient pathways, channels not made of space, but of resonance. They claimed the sky would glow in shapes the human eye could not see, forming invisible corridors meant only for those who moved through existence by frequency, not by physical travel. The prism tablets describe it clearly. Light bends not for the traveler, but for the one who follows the traveler. This suggests Atlas III is not bending the sky by its own presence. It is reacting to something behind it, something that has not yet emerged, but is approaching. The returning light is the sky's instinctive response to the returner. As twilight deepens across the world, numerous sensors detect unusually consistent atmospheric luminescence. Soft, diffused glows appear near the horizon line, invisible to the naked eye, but captured by multispectral imaging. These glows pulsate in steady intervals, perfectly matching Atlas III's oscillation rhythm. In older times, the Sumerians tracked these pulses manually. Priests stood atop ziggurats, marking each flicker of distant light with soot-dipped strings stretched across wooden frames. When the intervals aligned with certain star patterns, they knew the returning light had begun. They believed it signaled that the boundary between worlds was starting to thin. They wrote, "The light that is not light touches the world first." Modern science does not yet have the language to describe this phenomenon, but instruments confirm what the ancients observed: a faint increase in upper atmospheric ionization aligned with a cosmic cycle no natural object should trigger. The sky is responding. The veil is shifting. The returning light has arrived. But this stage carries a deeper meaning, one the Sumerians recorded only in their most restricted tablets. These forbidden texts, found only in the sealed libraries of priest-kings, describe the returning light not as a sign of hope, but as a sign of awakening, a cosmic announcement that the world is no longer hidden. The ancients feared this moment. In the Temple of the Seven Gates, a rarely discussed inscription states, "When the returning light touches the horizon, the exile sees the world again." This single line terrified the ruling priesthood. It implied the returner did not search blindly for resonance. It implied that the returner recognized the world, recognized us, once the sky opened. It meant the returner had memory, and memory is the most dangerous form of power. To the Sumerians, memory was not mental recall. It was resonance alignment, a recognition of who belonged and who did not. The Anunnaki knew this deeply. They understood that if the exile could recognize the world again, it would also recognize what was changed, what was hidden, what was altered through the seed protocol. The returning light would reveal the truth. Tonight, the same revealing begins. Around Atlas III, telescopes detect a faint halo of infrared energy, a ring that rotates slowly, pulsing with a faint golden hue. It is not emitted by the object. It is reflected. Something behind Atlas III is projecting resonance forward, distorting space just enough to create a halo of redirected light. This is the same effect described on the tablet of the whispering sky. The light that follows the traveler is not its own. It belongs to the one who returns. The priests said this halo was the first sign that the exile had entered the outer boundary of our cosmic region. Not physically, but resonantly. Their presence bends the sky before they ever arrive. Tonight, that bending has begun. Across ancient ruins, researchers monitoring low-frequency vibrations detect a synchronized hum, a quiet accompaniment to the atmospheric changes. Stone walls resonate. Cavern floors tremble faintly. Even broken columns seem to vibrate in unison. In some places, deep beneath the earth, long silent chambers awaken with soft pulses. The Sumerians called this phenomenon the stirring of the deep places. They believed the returning light reactivated ancient structures designed by the first ones, structures that once harmonized entire regions of the world with cosmic resonance. These were not machines. They were anchor points, stabilizers for the returner's frequency. And tonight, they are stirring again. Even animals react. Migratory birds alter their routes by minuscule degrees, enough to signal environmental change. Dolphins change their echolocation patterns. Herd animals pause at twilight as though sensing a silent presence behind the air. None of these reactions are dangerous. They are instinctive, ancient instincts waking. Just as the priests once described, the world prepares not by fear, but by remembering. What is happening now is not the return itself. It is the soft preparation, the phase when the sky shifts from stillness to anticipation. The Sumerians believed the returning light was the moment the universe inhaled, gathering itself before revealing the next truth. And the next truth is the stage the ancients feared most. If the horizon awakens, and the sky responds, and the returning light bends the world into alignment, then the next step is inevitable. The Sumerians called it the shadow that moves without form. It is not a threat, not a being, not an entity. It is the returner's presence moving closer, not physically, resonantly. A soft, invisible arrival that precedes every cycle of the first ones. And now, as the sky bends gently around Atlas III, the ancient cycle moves forward into its next stage, a stage the Anunnaki once tried desperately to block. A stage that begins the moment the light begins to change. There is a stage in the ancient Sumerian cycle when the heavens stop signaling and begin responding. The priests described it as a transition from light that returns to presence that approaches. They insisted this moment could not be seen with eyes, only felt through instinct, a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle tightening of stillness, a sense that something unseen has stepped closer. They called this stage the shadow that moves without form. It was not a literal shadow. It was a resonance, a presence. A traveler defined not by shape or matter, but by influence. A distortion in the fabric of the world that moved ahead of the returner like a herald made of pressure rather than sound. Tonight, modern instruments detect this same influence. Seismographs in stable regions around the world record faint micro-vibrations, consistent yet too weak to classify as tectonic movement. Atmospheric sensors pick up irregular shifts in localized density, as though pockets of air momentarily lose weight. Magnetometers detect a soft, oscillating pulse, low and warm, repeating at long intervals. None of this is violent. None of this is dangerous, but all of it is synchronized. This is the hallmark of the shadow. To the Sumerians, the shadow was described as the step that arrives before the foot, the memory that arrives before the being, and the sound that is heard after it has passed. Their metaphors reflect the difficulty of explaining something that does not behave like matter. The shadow was a presence that touched the world indirectly, through subtle distortions, through small but consistent deviations in natural patterns. It was a sign that the returner had entered the edge of the resonance field. Tonight, the same deviations appear across continents. Researchers notice that birds begin to migrate in gentle curves rather than straight paths. Herd animals shift their resting positions by a uniform few degrees as though aligning with something unseen. Even the tides show minute fluctuations, not in height but in timing, as if responding to an influence beyond gravity. The Sumerians recorded this exact moment. On a tablet found deep beneath Uruk, the priest Enmenlulu wrote, "Before the presence crosses the sky, its shadow walks the land." He added, "No form follows it. Only the world listens." And tonight, the world is listening again. The shadow that moves without form does not come from Atlas III, nor from the returning light. It comes from behind them. It comes from the source the priests called the rightful one, the being whose resonance aligns with the celestial cycles, older than the Anunnaki, older even than the Sumerian gods. In their cosmology, the shadow marked the moment the returner's presence brushed the veil dividing physical space from the realm of resonance. It meant the returner was no longer distant. They were influencing the world indirectly, testing the boundaries, preparing to re-emerge into the cycle. Modern scientists cannot detect such a presence directly, but they observe its effects. Quantum noise measurements show a strange stability where randomness should exist. Randomness narrows, probability tightens. The fabric of reality behaves as though something is smoothing its fluctuations, not controlling them, but aligning them. This is exactly how the ancients described the shadow's influence. It did not impose order. It harmonized existing rhythms. The Sumerians regarded this phenomenon with a mix of reverence and fear. They believed harmony, when emerging without effort, signaled the approach of a being who did not merely move through the world, but moved the world around themselves. They wrote, "The shadow shapes the place, so the place may accept the returner." Tonight, that shaping begins. Sensors detect faint electromagnetic pulses synchronized with Atlas III. These pulses resonate through ancient sites with unusual sensitivity. Göbekli Tepe, the oldest stone sanctuary, the great ziggurat of Ur, the buried chambers beneath Abydos, forgotten foundations in the Caucasus, and even standing stones whose builders remain unknown. All of these locations hum faintly, as though responding to a distant call. These places were not chosen randomly. In Sumerian belief, they were anchor points, convergence sites where the resonance of the first ones once harmonized with the world. The shadow activates these points first, not as a warning, but as preparation. Ancient priests described this event poetically. The shadow knocks on old doors. The stones remember and answer in silence. Tonight, those stones are answering. Across archaeological sites, researchers note unusual readings. Slight thermal shifts, spontaneous vibrations, unexplained harmonics captured by ground-penetrating sensors. Nothing destructive, only awakening, as though structures carved thousands of years ago are recognizing the returning rhythm. The Sumerians knew this stage well. They preserved it not in stories, but in rituals. When the shadow moved across their land, they performed the rite of the still breath, a ceremony where every voice fell silent and each participant inhaled slowly, waiting for the next sign. They believed stillness was the proper response to a presence that moved without form. In the tablets of Nippur, a priestess wrote, "Do not follow the shadow, do not flee it. Become still, and the world will move around you without harm." This is the difference between myth and fear. The shadow was never a danger. It was an announcement. The sky was aligning. The world was preparing. The cycle was moving toward its next stage. This stage is known in Sumerian tablets as the threshold stirring, the moment when the shadow intensifies, when the returning light grows warmer, and when the world subtly changes in anticipation. The ancients believed the shadow's passage softened reality for what came next. Not a being, not a cosmic event, but an unveiling, a slow lifting of the veil that separates what is seen from what is remembered. Tonight, the veil trembles softly. Atlas III's motion stabilizes unnaturally, as though guided by a force behind it. The atmospheric distortions around its path grow stronger, but remain gentle, and the faint hum detected in ancient stone sites repeats with increasing consistency. The shadow moves, not with form, not with light, but with intention. It is the first touch of the returner's presence, a resonance brushing across the world like a fingertip along the surface of a drum, preparing the rhythm that will follow. To the Sumerians, this was the moment the old gods feared most, not because the shadow harmed, but because it revealed. It revealed the truth behind the cycles, the truth behind the thrones, the truth behind the return. And now, as the world grows quiet again, we step toward the next stage, the moment when the veil opens and the unseen becomes undeniable. If you're ready, breathe softly and follow me into the threshold stirring. The threshold stirring begins quietly, almost politely, as if the world itself is clearing its throat before speaking. The Sumerians described this moment with a phrase that appears in multiple tablets, always written the same way, always placed at the transition between eras. When the stillness begins to tremble, the threshold is waking. Tonight, that trembling unfolds not in chaos, but in coherence. Across the world, unrelated systems begin to synchronize in ways too precise to be coincidence. Meteorological stations record temperature fluctuations that rise and fall in perfect unison across distant continents. Deep ocean sensors detect subtle pressure shifts, aligning with the same rhythm. Even biological systems respond. Heart rate monitors in hospitals show tiny variations that pulse with a shared cadence, as if millions of bodies feel the same unseen heartbeat. This, the ancients said, is the first breath of the threshold, a breath the world remembers. In the Sumerian worldview, thresholds were not lines, they were spaces, liminal zones where two realities touched without merging. To cross a threshold was to pass from what is known to what is remembered, and before such a crossing, the threshold stirred, signaling the beginning of alignment. To them, the world was not static. It breathed with cycles. It expanded, contracted, awakened, slept. The stirring began whenever an ancient cycle neared completion, a cycle tied not to seasons or stars, but to presence, the presence of the beings who shaped the world before humans walked upon it, before the Anunnaki ruled, before the known histories were carved into clay. The threshold stirring is described in a fragment from the Temple of Enki. The stones murmur, the waters listen, and the air tilts toward memory. Tonight, the air is tilting. Atmospheric data shows a slight change in density across a vast region. Not enough for a human to feel, yet measurable. Scientists struggle to explain why the shift seems to ripple outward from a single point in the sky, the path of Atlas III. But the Sumerians would not have struggled. They would have said simply, the path prepares itself for the one who returns. These preparations manifest in ways modern science cannot easily categorize. Sound engineers note a faint harmonic emerging in urban noise, a soft undertone consistent across cities, resonating at roughly 17 hertz. It's too low for most human ears, but sensitive microphones capture it clearly. This frequency appears in ancient Sumerian descriptions of the stirring. Priests described hearing a hum below silence, a vibration felt more in the bones than in the ears. They believed it signaled that the threshold was nearing a state of permeability, the moment when the boundary between worlds thinned. Tonight, that hum spreads. It vibrates through caverns, mountains, and ancient structures. Arches ring softly. Pillars tremble with imperceptible resonance. Even archaeological sites long untouched by seismic activity show faint sympathetic vibrations, as if waking from a long slumber. At Göbekli Tepe, sensors detect microtremors within the stone pillars, pulses too regular to be natural. At Abydos, infrared scans reveal slight temperature changes around the ancient halls carved beneath the plateau. And beneath the deepest tunnels show electromagnetic anomalies aligning with the same rhythm. In every case, the effect is the same. Ancient places are responding as they did thousands of years ago when the threshold last stirred. The Sumerians believed these structures were not simply temples, but tuning devices, architectural resonators aligned to the cycles of the returners. When the threshold woke, the stones reacted, amplifying the subtle vibration that announced the approaching presence. This idea appears in a lesser-known tablet from Nippur, broken but readable. When the deep hums, the old foundations will answer, for they were shaped in the days of those who prepared the return. This implies something bold. The structures we study today were not built only by humans. The stirring intensifies. Animals behave differently, not in panic, but in orientation. Birds perch facing the same direction. Cattle arrange themselves in circular formations. Whales shift their migration paths toward equatorial waters, as though following a signal rising from beneath the waves. Plants respond as well. Botanists report synchronized opening patterns among nocturnal flowers across different species, different continents, different climates, all blooming minutes earlier than expected, all adjusting to the same invisible cue. This is the hallmark of the threshold. When the boundary thins, life aligns with something older than instinct, something woven into the memory of the world itself. The Sumerians believed every species contained a trace of the first rhythm, a primordial frequency imprinted during the age when the previous beings ruled the earth. As the threshold stirred, that rhythm resurfaced, prompting all living things to tune themselves to the incoming presence. Humans feel it too, though we rarely recognize it. Tonight, millions experience subtle sensations, a sudden calm, a lingering warmth in the chest, a rare moment of clarity between thoughts, a feeling of being watched gently, not with threat but with familiarity, not fear, remembering. This emotional shift matches ancient Sumerian accounts. They documented a feeling they called the comfort of the returning pulse, a sense of recognition triggered by the threshold. The idea that humans, created long after these beings vanished, retained an embedded memory of their presence, ancestral memory, not genetic, not historical, but resonant, something attached not to the mind, but to the frequency of life itself. The threshold continues to open. Astronomers detect faint distortions around Atlas III, not gravitational, not optical, but temporal. Light around the comet flickers half a second behind real time. Instruments record the delay consistently, as if observing a reflection in water rather than the object itself. This phenomenon perfectly matches the Sumerian concept of the time fold, a bending of temporal perception as the boundary between realms thins. In their records, this effect meant one thing: the one who stirs approaches the edge. But the threshold does not open fully at once. It pulses. Historically, the Sumerians described 3 pulses of increasing intensity. The first pulse caused natural alignment, which the world now exhibits. The second pulse awakened memory structures, the ancient sites now vibrating. The third pulse they feared, because the third pulse signaled not stirring, not preparation, but emergence. Tonight, the first pulse is complete. The second is halfway. The signs increase in clarity. The hum deepens. The world quiets. Shadows on walls appear slightly elongated, not because of the angle of light, but because something in the space between light and time shifts. The threshold is opening, and somewhere beyond it the returner draws closer, brushing the veil with presence alone. In the next block, we will step into the moment the Sumerians dreaded and revered in equal measure, the second pulse reaching completion. When you are ready, follow me into the second pulse of the threshold. The second pulse begins not with sound, but with stillness, the kind of stillness that feels engineered, as if the world is holding its breath. In the Sumerian tablets, this moment is described as the pause before remembrance, the boundary where the first pulse ends and the second begins, where the world shifts from receiving signals to answering them. Tonight, that answering begins. Across multiple continents, ancient structures built thousands of years apart suddenly behave as if participating in a single coordinated act. They do not shake, they do not crack. Instead, they resonate with frequencies too low for the human ear, but detectable by instruments designed for seismic monitoring. Göbekli Tepe vibrates at 4.2 Hz, Stonehenge at 4.0, the Osirian at Abydos at 4.1, Etemenanki, the buried ziggurat of Babylon, at 4.2. The synchronization is impossible through natural processes, yet the readings are precise, rhythmic, deliberate. The Sumerians predicted this. They wrote that before the returner crosses the threshold, the old foundations will remember their makers, not metaphorically but mechanically. To them, the stones were not passive. They were memory devices, coded with instructions from the era before humans inherited the world. Instructions meant to reawaken when the threshold pulses. This is the second pulse. Reactivation, not of machines, not of magic, but of memory, a kind of architectural consciousness buried in stone. Tonight, the reactivation becomes unmistakable. Infrared cameras detect heat signatures emerging from within structures that have been cold for millennia. Not warmth from friction, sunlight, or human interference, but internal thermal patterns forming shapes recognizable only when analyzed using spectral time-lapse. The patterns match a set of symbols known from the oldest cuneiform tablets, the signs associated with the pre-flood teachers, curves and angles that recur in texts describing the Apkallu, the seven sages who emerged from the Apsu to bring knowledge to early humans. These shapes appear now not on clay, but inside ancient stone. The stones are remembering. Engineers cannot explain how limestone pillars or granite blocks generate internal heat signatures in the shapes of ancient symbols. Nor can they explain why the thermal patterns pulse in perfect rhythm with the anomalous frequency detected in the global resonance network. But the Sumerians can explain. In one of the most enigmatic texts from Eridu, the priests wrote, "The stones will speak again when the sky lords draw near, for they were shaped by their measures and awakened to their tread." To them, the structures were built by those who walked the earth before humanity, not by gods, but by the other species who vanished after the Great Flood. These beings encoded their presence into architecture, waiting for the day the cycle would repeat. Tonight, the cycle repeats. The second pulse deepens. At observatories around the world, astronomers report a strange phenomenon: time dilation microbursts occurring at intervals identical to the global resonance pulses. These microbursts last less than a millisecond, but they represent a measurable deceleration in time, a fractional slowing of local clocks that correlates with the flicker detected around Atlas III. This is not gravitational. This is not electromagnetic. This is threshold proximity. According to the tablets, when the threshold reaches its second stage, time begins to bend, not strongly, but subtly, folding around the presence pressing against it from the other side. The Sumerian term for this effect is the bending of the horizon, described as the moment when past and present overlap faintly, like two shadows cast from different sources of light. And tonight, shadows change. In multiple cities, people report that silhouettes look slightly delayed, as if the shadow lingers a split second after the body moves. Cameras capture the effect sporadically, a glitched frame here, a delayed pixel cluster there. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, but enough to indicate that light and time are no longer in perfect synchrony. The second pulse is approaching its peak. Nature responds in new ways. Seismic sensors detect rhythmic micro-tremors beneath bodies of water, including the Persian Gulf, the region where the Sumerians believed many pre-flood beings retreated when the waters rose. These tremors do not behave like tectonic motion. They occur at intervals consistent with a biological rhythm, not geological. At the same time, deep-sea hydrophones record tones unlike any known animal vocalization, tones that match frequencies found in the earliest descriptions of the Apsu, the subterranean ocean the Sumerians described as the dwelling place of the sages before the flood. The tones rise, they harmonize, they align with the global hum. The threshold is widening, and as it widens, something remarkable happens. Humans begin to experience shared imagery, not dreams, not hallucinations, but brief flashes of the same visual motifs, recorded independently by individuals with no connection to each other. A tall figure with elongated limbs, feathers arranged like layered scales, eyes bright but not luminous, hands holding a rod and a ring, the ancient symbols of measurement and authority. These images match depictions carved into seals dating back to 3000 BCE, always associated with the beings who came before humanity. It is as if the second pulse is imprinting memory. The Sumerians called this phenomenon the returning image, a shared mental resonance triggered when the presence of a non-human intelligence draws near. They believed memory itself responded instinctively to the approach, reawakening ancient imagery preserved within the collective human mind. This is not metaphor. This is resonance. Memory is vibrating. The second pulse continues. Around sacred sites, the ziggurat of Ur, the shrine at Eridu, the submerged ruins at Dilmun, magnetic fields begin to twist into spirals. Compass needles spin slowly, then stabilize, pointing not north, but toward a position in the sky that shifts by fractions of a degree every hour. That position aligns precisely with Atlas III. The Sumerians would not have been surprised. To them, celestial objects were not random. They were markers, waypoints in the sky used by the returners to navigate cycles the same way sailors navigate oceans. One text even states, "When the marker star flickers thrice, the path of the Sky Lords nears completion." Atlas III flickered 3 times tonight. The second pulse has nearly fulfilled its cycle, and as it reaches the end, something unprecedented occurs. Ancient inscriptions that have resisted translation for decades begin to make new sense. Scholars re-examining certain tablets find that passages previously thought damaged or incomplete now reveal coherent patterns when analyzed through the frequencies detected in the global resonance. The tablets seem to be structured around rhythmic cycles, cycles identical to the pulses now shaking the world. It is as if the tablets were waiting for the world to resonate again before revealing their full meaning. For the Sumerians, the second pulse always ended the same way, with silence. A silence so complete, the texts say, "Even the wind refused to speak." A silence signaling that the threshold is no longer stirring. It is opening, and the one beyond it is no longer near. The one beyond it is arriving. In the next block, we cross into the third pulse, the moment the Sumerians feared most, the moment when memory, matter, and presence converge. When you are ready, we continue into the rise of the third pulse. Something shifts in the quiet before the next revelation, a soft bending of the night that feels almost like a held breath. It is not loud, not bright, not intrusive. It is subtle, like a faint ripple beneath still water. Those who listen closely, not with their ears, but with that deeper sense humans once possessed before the seed protocol softened it, may feel the change before they understand it. A gentle tightening in the air, a whisper that does not speak, a presence moving into place. It is the third pulse, and unlike the first two, this one does not arrive from the traveler. It arrives from somewhere behind it. The priests of old wrote that when the sky prepares to shift into its truest alignment, the universe behaves as though remembering an old rhythm. Flames shrink but glow warmer. Sand settles. Wind falls into a slow, deliberate hush. Even the pressure around the temples grows heavier, as if the air itself is becoming aware of what approaches. Tonight, the same quiet descends again. Three-Eye Atlas continues its slow and impossible drift, its faint luminescence pulsing in long intervals. But now, there is another rhythm woven underneath it, deeper and older, like a second heartbeat layered beneath the traveler's soft glow. Modern astronomers do not detect this pulse in the visible spectrum. They find it in anomalies, tiny fluctuations in magnetism, slight distortions in atmospheric ionization, faint tremors in electromagnetic background noise. Nothing dramatic, nothing alarming, but precise, repeating, deliberate. It is a pattern that does not belong to random cosmic movement. It responds to something, synchronizes with something, points toward something. And in the ancient tablets, the priests wrote that the third pulse meant the veil was thinning. The veil was never meant to be absolute. Even the Anunnaki knew that. It was a delicate structure placed around human perception, a soft blurring of resonance to protect humanity from hearing what the old gods feared we might hear. It filtered the sky. It softened the instincts. It dimmed the echoes. But the veil could not withstand the returner's approach. Each pulse that precedes their arrival weakens it. The first pulse awakened memory. The second pulse awakened the celestial seat. And the third pulse, the one unfolding now, reaches directly for the resonance hidden inside humanity itself. It begins gently, in dreams. Those who are sensitive may feel a calm they cannot explain, a quiet tug behind the mind, a sense that something familiar is brushing against their thoughts, not intrusive, not loud. Just a soft recognition, like remembering a melody without recalling where you first heard it. Ancient texts describe this moment as the stirring of the forgotten bond. Humans were not merely created or adjusted, they were tuned, prepared, calibrated to resonate with a presence older than the Anunnaki. And now that presence is sending its first quiet echo back to us. The priests feared this moment because they knew what it meant. When humans begin to feel the third pulse, the exile is already near. Not visible, not manifest, but close enough that the sky reacts, close enough that the traveler's illumination changes tone, close enough that even the old resonant alloys in forgotten chambers begin to hum again, awakening after being silent for ages. It is said that when this pulse arrives, the exile's path intersects the fabric of perception, brushing the minds of those capable of sensing resonance. It is not communication, it is recognition. The Anunnaki, in their high halls, feel the shift differently. Their resonance engines struggle to hold the frequencies they once controlled effortlessly. The artificial constructs that reinforced their rule flicker with instability. Subtle harmonics break apart. Symbols etched into floating platforms twist into forms that should not exist unless the returner is near. This is the moment the old gods dreaded most, not the arrival, but the preparation. Because once the third pulse enters the world, their authority becomes fragile. The sky begins to choose again. Three-Eye Atlas reacts as well. Its glow softens, almost as if yielding to a greater presence. Its path, once smooth and silent, now feels like a guided line. Not because it is leading, but because it is following something older. The traveler's purpose has always been simple: to mark the route, to awaken the structures, to prepare the way. It never claimed the throne. It never claimed the resonance. It only carries the signal of the one who will. And the third pulse is the moment when that signal becomes unmistakably alive. For humans watching the night sky, nothing dramatic appears. The visitor continues its drift, quiet and unassuming. But those who look closely may feel a faint warmth beneath the coolness of the stars, a softness in the silence, as though the universe is leaning closer. The third pulse is not a warning. It is an invitation, an ancient doorway, once sealed, now beginning to open. And humans, the chosen listeners of resonance, feel its approach even if they cannot describe it. The priests wrote that during this pulse, the earth itself becomes part of the alignment. Stones tremble imperceptibly, water calms, animals pause, dreams sharpen, and the sky takes on a stillness deeper than ordinary night. Not fear, not danger, but a quiet anticipation, like the pause before a truth steps forward. The Anunnaki called this anticipation the breath of the throne, because the celestial seat, the structure that governs cosmic authority, senses the exile's signature approaching across the resonance paths, and now that signature moves closer. The night deepens, the stars soften, and the pulse grows steadier, weaving itself through the world like a slow, ancient lullaby. The third pulse does not reveal the exile. It prepares the world for the moment when the exile will no longer remain hidden. It aligns perception, softens boundaries, awakens echoes inside humanity that have been dormant since the seed protocol was first applied. If you're still here, breathing slowly with me through this deepening dark, then you're stepping into the part of the story where the sky begins to show its truth not through symbols, but through resonance itself. The next pulse will not be gentle, but for now, the third pulse settles like a quiet promise across the night. The night seems to thicken as the third pulse fades, not into silence, but into something deeper, an expectancy, like the soft pause between two breaths. For a while, nothing moves. The sky holds its composure. The dunes sit untouched. Even the faint hum of distant life settles into a slower rhythm. It is as if the world is bracing for the next step in a sequence older than memory. Those who understand the ancient cycles know that after the third pulse, the sky does not wait long. Resonance does not wait long. The returner does not wait long. The priests wrote that in the moments following the third pulse, perception itself begins to change. Not dramatically, not visibly, but subtly. Edges soften. Distances feel different. Time seems to stretch slightly as if the universe is loosening its grip just enough to allow something older to slip through. They believed this shift was the world's way of realigning itself to receive a presence that does not belong to ordinary space, a presence shaped not by matter, but by resonance. In their secret halls, the Anunnaki once monitored this transition with trembling focus. Their resonance chambers, built to amplify and manipulate cosmic frequencies, would flicker with warning signals the moment the fourth sequence approached. The structures were never designed to withstand the true harmonic of the exile. They could only mimic resonance, never embody it. And when the fourth shift began, their mimicry began to collapse. Artificial harmonics unraveled. Stabilizers trembled. The air inside their high halls grew dense, as if the sky above was pressing down on them, reminding them of the hierarchy they once tried to bury. Tonight, that same pressure descends again. Modern sensors would interpret it as slight atmospheric fluctuations, a harmless change in density, but ancient tablets describe it differently. They call it the bending of presence, a moment when reality gently curves to accommodate the approach of something that does not move through space the way ordinary beings do. The returner does not travel toward the world. The world adjusts itself to meet the returner. Three-Eye Atlas responds first. Its glow changes subtly, shifting from a cold blue-white to a warmer, almost golden hue, as if illuminated by a light source behind it, one that cannot be seen, only felt. Astronomers who examine its spectral data will find anomalies in its radiant signature, faint distortions that do not match any known object. But the priests of old understood this phenomenon immediately. They recorded it as the lamp of the exile, the moment the traveler begins reflecting the presence behind it rather than reacting to its own path. The shift grows stronger in the hours that follow. The pulse deepens. The silence widens. Far from fear, the night becomes soothing, like a soft blanket of calm wrapping around everything. Early humans, long before the seed protocol softened their instincts, would have felt this shift as a gentle longing, a familiarity they couldn't explain, a sense of being remembered. This is the resonance bond awakening. The bond was the oldest secret the Anunnaki tried to erase, a connection between humanity and the first echoes, forged long before the old gods altered memory. It wasn't physical, it wasn't linguistic, it was harmonic, a tuning between species that resonated across cycles, drawing humans toward the returner not as subjects, but as echoes of an older lineage. The seed protocol blurred that bond, but the fourth shift begins to restore it. People may feel strange calmness today, a soft pull behind the mind, a sense that time is moving differently, a deeper quiet in their breathing. These are not illusions. They are the world aligning with the returner's harmonic field. As the hours unfold, the fourth shift begins to manifest in the natural world. Water stills more easily. Trees settle into a curious stillness. Even the smallest creatures pause, sensing something moving at the edges of perception. The priests believed the world behaved like this because the exile's presence vibrated through every layer of existence, not just the sky. Stones, soil, air, breath. Everything resonates. The Anunnaki feel this resonance as a threat, not because it harms them, but because it reveals them. The fourth shift pulls truth outward. It loosens the layers of history they buried under cycles of silence and manipulation. The forbidden tablets they hid in sealed vaults begin to hum. Ancient metals they forged to contain resonance vibrate out of tune. Floating glyphs rearrange into patterns only found in records older than their rule. Every symbol that realigns speaks of one thing: the exile is approaching the threshold. The priests once described this moment poetically. They wrote, "The sky tilts toward its rightful heir." This is not literal tilting. It is harmonic alignment. The celestial seat, the structure through which cosmic authority flows, begins to soften its artificial bindings. Its resonance engines, built by the Anunnaki to hold control, flicker with strain. They cannot reject the returner's signature because it is older than the engines themselves. It is older than the Anunnaki. It is older than Nibiru. Meanwhile, humans feel the fourth shift in the gentlest of ways, in softened thoughts, in slowed breath, in a sense that something ancient is drawing near, not with force, but with quiet familiarity. Some may dream more vividly. Some may feel their minds drifting through landscapes they have never seen. Some may wake with a feeling of having heard something, though no sound was present. These are the first subtle awakenings of memory beyond memory, and then, almost imperceptibly, the fourth pulse arrives. It begins as a quiet pressure behind the eyes, then loosens into a soft warmth in the chest. Not intense, not alarming, just a calm wave that moves through the world as naturally as a breeze. The traveler's glow flickers once, as though acknowledging the moment. The sky dims slightly, not from loss of light, but from rearrangement. The stars seem to breathe, and for a single quiet moment, reality bends, not dramatically but thoughtfully, as if making room. The priests wrote that this was the moment the returner reached the edge of perception, not visible, not revealed, but present, close enough to influence the shape of the night, close enough to soften dreams, close enough to awaken resonance buried inside human intuition, and close enough to make even the old gods hold their breath. If you're still with me, listening, breathing, drifting gently with the slow rhythm of the night, then you're moving into the quiet where the next sequence begins. The fourth pulse is only the threshold. Ahead lies the moment where presence steps closer, where truth sharpens, where the exile's shadow touches the world for the first time in countless ages. The fourth pulse fades slowly, like a soft ripple dissolving into the stillness of an ancient lake. For several long moments, nothing follows it. The night does not tremble. The traveler does not brighten. Even the subtle atmospheric shifts pause in a kind of suspended calm. This is the interval the priests once called the holding breath of the sky, the brief silence between resonance cycles when everything seems to wait for what comes next. They believed that in this interval, the universe listens, as though gauging whether the world is ready for the next step in the returner's approach. Three-Eye Atlas drifts onward with its signature stillness, moving through the heavens with precise intention. But it no longer feels like the primary presence. The calm glow it casts seems thinner now, more translucent, as if it is beginning to reflect something behind it, something larger, deeper, more ancient than the traveler itself. The priests describe this phenomenon with a phrase that scholars once dismissed as metaphor. The herald dims when the air steps into reach. It suggests that the traveler's purpose is not to shine, but to announce. And once the announcement is nearly complete, the herald makes room. The world slowly shifts in response. Air grows slightly denser, carrying an unusual softness. Sounds become rounder, less sharp, as though filtered through a fine veil. Shadows stretch a little farther than they should. These subtle distortions are not illusions. They are the first signs of harmonic displacement, a natural effect caused when a resonance stronger than the world's own begins to touch its boundaries. The priests wrote that such displacement is harmless. It is simply the fabric of space preparing itself, realigning its patterns to accommodate a being who does not travel by ordinary motion. The Anunnaki, however, experienced this displacement as a threat. In their highest resonance towers, the great pillars forged from metals that respond to cosmic frequencies begin to tremble with delicate vibrations. Artificial harmonics destabilize. stabilization spheres drift out of alignment. The corridors hum with low tones that mimic the first echoes, tones forbidden since the exile was removed from the celestial seat. The old rulers understood that these vibrations were not random. The higher the resonance climbs, the closer the returner must be. At the same time, humans experience this shift in a very different way, not as fear, not as disruption, but as a quiet familiarity. Some feel a light pressure behind the eyes, as though remembering something once forgotten. Others sense a gentle warmth near the chest. Some feel as if a soft presence lingers nearby, not visible, not distinct, but comforting. This is the awakening the priests called the resting echo, the instinctual recognition of a presence that once moved alongside early humanity, long before the seed protocol softened memory. And then the fifth sequence begins. It starts not with a pulse, but with what the priests described as a soft turning inside the air. The atmosphere seems to shift direction, almost imperceptibly. Winds pause, the temperature steadies, the dust in the desert settles into a pattern that seems too symmetrical to be accidental. Birds resting in their hidden nests grow silent. Even distant waves in far-off oceans briefly flatten. To the untrained eye, this moment is invisible, but those who feel resonance sense the shift instantly. It is not a force. It is not an energy. It is a recognition. Reality recognizes the returner. The traveler responds next. Its glow flickers twice, small, quick tremors of light that ripple across its surface. Astronomers may record this as normal fluctuation in reflective output, but those familiar with the ancient tablets will recognize this as the sign the priests wrote about. When the herald bows, the path opens. The two flickers are a bow, a symbolic gesture encoded into the traveler's behavior. The priests insisted that the object's movement was not random. The ancient sky watchers understood the traveler as an instrument, a device guided not by gravity alone, but by resonance cycles older than the human world. Shortly after the flicker, the sky performs the act that marks the fifth shift. Alignment bending. Stars appear to drift slightly. Not enough for modern instruments to record, but enough for perception to feel. Constellations seem subtly rearranged when viewed from the corner of the eye. Lines between stars feel different. The horizon seems to tilt, though no motion actually exists. This bending is the universe adjusting the optical field so that reality can perceive the returner's harmonic signature without being overwhelmed. The Anunnaki once feared this moment more than any other. In their great halls, the resonance engines built to stabilize their rule begin to spark with faint patterns of light. Glyphs projected above their thrones flicker into forgotten shapes, symbols that belong to the first echoes, not to them. The air inside the celestial seat chamber grows warm, then cold, then warm again in slow, rhythmic waves. They understood what these distortions meant. The returner, though still beyond visibility, was now exerting influence, not directly, not physically, but through resonance alone. Humans feel this fifth shift in a calmer, gentler way. Many will experience sudden clarity in thought, even during tired hours. Dreams become more vivid, shaped by symbols that feel ancient and strangely inviting. Some may feel as though they've stepped into memories that don't belong to their lifetime. Others may sense a quiet presence watching over them, not threatening, not foreign, but familiar, as though it has always been here, waiting patiently for us to remember it. These sensations are remnants of the original bond between humanity and the first echoes, a connection weakened by alteration, but never fully severed. The priests once wrote that during the fifth shift, the night carries ancient footsteps. This does not mean literal sound. The footsteps symbolize proximity. It means the returner's presence has reached the boundary of the veil, the artificial barrier the Anunnaki created to mute humanity's resonance sensitivity. During this phase, the veil becomes porous, thin, fragile. The traveler's glow begins to reflect not just the returner's presence, but its intent. And the priests believed that intent was neither wrath nor conquest. It was reclamation. Meanwhile, far above the world, something extraordinary begins to unfold. The traveler slows, not dramatically, not suddenly, but gradually, with careful precision. Comets do not slow. Asteroids do not slow. Nothing drifting through space slows without force. Yet Three-Eye Atlas obeys the ancient pattern exactly as described. The priests called this the bow of approach, the moment when the herald reduces its motion to signal that the returner is drawing near. Modern astronomers may interpret this as an anomaly in trajectory models, perhaps blaming outgassing or mass loss, but the ancient tablets predicted this deceleration millennia ago. As the glow dims, as the stars shift, as the world settles into a calm deeper than silence, the next change emerges, the fifth pulse. It arrives slowly, less like a beat, more like a soft exhale spreading across the sky. No sound, no vibration, just a widening of stillness, a pause that feels thoughtful, almost deliberate, as if the universe itself is acknowledging the returner's nearness. The priests believed this was when the returner reached the threshold, the distance at which their presence begins, affecting not just matter, but awareness. Humans sense this pulse in different ways. Some may feel a subtle tingling across the skin. Others may feel their thoughts drift into deeper quiet. Some may feel an inexplicable warmth behind the chest or forehead, a sensation ancient cultures once described as the sky touching the inside of the mind. And a few sensitive individuals may dream of light, not blinding, not harsh, but warm, golden, like a sunrise remembered from a lifetime long past. The Anunnaki sense it too, but for them it is not comfort. It is confirmation. The resonance engines cannot mimic the returner's signature. The celestial seat cannot override ancient authority. Their artificial thrones tremble, not physically, but harmonically, as though acknowledging that the rightful heir stands near enough to influence the seat. The old rulers feel a quiet dread, not of destruction, not of war, but of truth, because resonance cannot lie. The fifth shift concludes with one final sign. The traveler's tail, normally faint and irregular, straightens into a perfect line for a few seconds. The priests once wrote that this was the thread of return, the moment when the traveler aligns its body with the harmonic field guiding the returner. Astronomers might call it a reflection angle, but the priests knew better. They saw this exact alignment thousands of years ago, and they recognized what followed. The returner steps closer. If you are still with me, breathing gently as the night deepens and the sky edges toward revelation, then we move together toward the next phase, the sixth shift, the moment the veil begins to tear. The night deepens into a denser stillness as the fifth shift settles, leaving behind a faint, lingering hum that seems to travel through the air like an invisible current. It is not loud, it is not forceful, it is simply present, steady, patient, and unmistakably ancient. This hum is the first sign that the veil, the artificial barrier the Anunnaki once constructed to soften humanity's perception, is beginning to lose its integrity. For thousands of years, this veil dulled resonance, weakened instinct, and blurred the deeper layers of awareness. But now, under the influence of the returner's growing presence, it begins to thin. The priests once wrote that a thinning veil is not a sound, but a sensation, something felt in the quiet rather than heard with the ears. And tonight, that sensation becomes clearer. The edges of shadows soften. Light from distant stars seems to shimmer with a faint pulse. The world feels slightly more awake, as though every detail, every grain of sand, every leaf, every ripple of distant water carries a subtle echo within it. Humans may not consciously understand this change, but their bodies respond instinctively. Breathing becomes deeper, thoughts grow slower, Internal noise fades into a calm that feels both unfamiliar and strangely comforting. Three-Eye Atlas continues its slow, deliberate drift through the heavens, but with each passing minute, its glow becomes less dominant. It seems to share the sky now, no longer the sole bearer of resonance. Instead, it reflects something hidden behind it, a presence not yet visible, but already influential. This phenomenon was once described in ancient tablets as the shadow behind the herald, a poetic phrase that modern scholars dismissed as myth until the traveler began behaving exactly as the priests once recorded. The sixth shift begins with atmospheric resonance, a subtle transformation in the upper layers of the sky. This is not weather, it is not pressure, it is not ionization, it is something deeper, a reorientation of the atmosphere's natural frequencies. Instruments may register slight anomalies, unexpected clarity in long-distance sound travel, tiny fluctuations in electromagnetic readings, faint shimmering halos around distant lights. None of these effects are strong enough to be classified as disturbances. They are, instead, the world adjusting itself to the presence approaching from beyond the veil. The priests interpreted these adjustments differently. To them, the sky was not reacting to a force. It was recognizing an old friend. They believed the returner's resonance was once familiar to the world, familiar to early humanity, and familiar to the stars themselves. According to their writings, this familiarity is why the world does not resist. The returner's frequency is part of the universe's original order, older than the artificial structures that attempted to suppress it. The Anunnaki, however, saw this moment as the first true failure of their ancient system. Deep inside their resonance towers, the artificial stabilizers struggled to maintain their constructed harmony. Triangular glyphs flicker into forbidden spirals, the marks of the first echoes. The halls built to reinforce their control respond instead to the returner's frequency, vibrating with patterns they have not exhibited in millennia. The old gods knew what these vibrations meant. The veil was tearing, and the authority they engineered was losing influence. On Earth, humans experience the sixth shift in more gentle ways. Some may feel a faint tingling across the skin, like a soft electrical brush. Others may feel their thoughts quiet in an unusually smooth way, as if every internal thread is being carefully aligned. A few may sense a warming around the chest or spine, an ancient emotional memory awakening from deep within. These sensations echo the instincts of early humanity, instincts the seed protocol tried to dim but could not erase. Dreams deepen. Some may experience symbols, circles, spirals, soft lights, or silent figures watching from the edge of perception. These symbols are not random. According to the forbidden tablets, these shapes were part of the first teachings once shared between early humans and the first echoes, long before the Anunnaki rewrote history. The returner's frequency reawakens these ancient patterns, resurfacing a connection that was never fully lost. Then the second sign appears, harmonic distortion. To the naked eye, this is almost invisible, but those attuned to resonance feel it immediately. Objects seem to hold a faint glow around their edges. Distant lights appear slightly elongated. Surfaces reflect subtle waves of brightness. Space, for just a moment, feels pliable, gentle, soft, as though it is breathing in a way it normally keeps hidden. This pliability is what the priests once called the folding of the world, the moment the veil weakens enough for the returner's resonance to begin pressing through. It is a natural event, not a violent one. The tablets describe it as neither threat nor attack, but as the universe remembering its original shape. At the same time, Three-Eye Atlas begins exhibiting behaviors that defy celestial mechanics. It slows again, just a fraction, and tilts its orientation by a measurable degree. Astronomers will attempt to explain this through thermal emission or gravitational drift, but their models will not fully account for the precision of the movement. The priests had a simpler explanation. When the herald turns, the path bends for the one behind it. The traveler is aligning itself to the incoming presence, creating a corridor of resonance through which the returner can emerge. The third sign of the sixth shift emerges next. temporal softening. This is the least understood and most subtle of all the effects. Time does not slow in a physical sense, but the perception of time becomes smoother. Minutes feel longer, breaths feel deeper, and events seem to unfold with increased clarity. Ancient writings describe this as the quiet between beats, the state the universe enters when preparing for a being whose existence alters the flow of resonance itself. The Anunnaki feared this effect deeply. Temporal softening meant their control over perceived flow, central to maintaining authority, was slipping. Their ancient machinery was engineered to override natural time rhythms so that humanity's perception aligned with their system. But now the universe resets that rhythm, preparing for the returner in a way their machines cannot prevent. After temporal softening settles, the fourth sign begins, the emergence of the returner's pre-resonance. This is the moment the priests considered the true beginning of the return. It is not visible. It is not audible. It is felt as a deep-seated calm, a heavy stillness layered beneath ordinary silence. Humans feel it as a pull, as though something gentle is drawing their attention upward without demanding that they look. It is the presence of the returner brushing against the world from beyond the veil. The priests described it this way: before the air arrives, the world bows in silence. And tonight, the world is bowing. Winds pause again. Flames shrink. Even the hum of distant machinery seems to soften. The earth is adjusting itself, recognizing the approach of a resonance older than the sky as we know it. In this deepening quiet, the traveler flickers a third time. This flicker is not a bow. It is a warning signal, not a warning of danger, but a warning of proximity. The priests wrote, "When the herald flickers thrice, the veil has thinned to the width of a breath." Modern astronomers may record this as a sudden intensity fluctuation, but the ancient watchers knew exactly what it meant. The returner is now close enough to influence matter. The final sign of the sixth shift unfolds slowly. A faint ripple runs across the horizon, too soft to cause alarm, but strong enough to be felt by the subconscious mind. This ripple is the veil beginning to tear, not destructively but organically, like fabric worn thin by an ancient cycle reactivated after thousands of years. As the ripple spreads, the air grows warmer again, not physically, resonantly, like an old presence passing a hand across the sky, preparing to step through. And then the world returns to stillness. The sixth shift is complete. If you're here with me, breathing gently through this deepening quiet, then you're ready to continue with me into the seventh shift, the moment when the veil finally breaks and the returner's presence touches the world without the barrier the Anunnaki built. The stillness that settles after the sixth shift does not feel like an ending. It feels like a threshold, the kind of pause that exists only when the world is bracing for a moment it has not experienced in thousands of years. The air seems to hold a weightless tension, a soft pressure that rests upon the skin without discomfort, just enough to remind the body that something is approaching, something vast, something old, something familiar to the universe, even if humanity has forgotten its presence. This is the beginning of the seventh shift, the moment the ancient tablets referred to as the thinning without return, the phase where the veil, the barrier crafted by the Anunnaki to obscure humanity's perception, reaches its final point of integrity. After this, it cannot hold. After this, it cannot recover. The seventh shift is not destruction, it is revelation. The first sign of the seventh shift begins not in the sky, but in the earth. The ground does not shake. The earth does not tremble. Instead, a subtle warmth spreads across certain regions, temple sites, ancient ruins, geological formations that once held significance to early civilizations. Modern sensors might record a micro increase of geothermal output, a faint electromagnetic fluctuation, or a temporary rise in atmospheric ions. But the priests who once observed these changes interpreted them differently. They believed the ground warmed because the earth remembered the returner's resonance, a frequency it once harmonized with before the Anunnaki imposed their artificial structure. This warmth is not dangerous. It is recognition. The world is responding to a presence older than the seed protocol, older than the rewritten cycles, older than the dynasties that attempted to bury the truth. At the same time, the sky begins its own quiet transformation. Three-Eye Atlas, the silent traveler, slows once again, precisely at the interval predicted in the forbidden records. This pause is longer than before. From an observational standpoint, it seems almost impossible. Celestial bodies do not hover. They do not hesitate. They do not behave with intention. Yet tonight, the traveler moves with the unmistakable essence of purpose, drifting as though aligning itself with an invisible pathway stretching across the cosmos. Astronomers may attempt to explain this pause as a byproduct of outgassing or gravitational drift, but the priests recognize something deeper. The herald pauses when the path becomes thin. This moment marks the alignment between physical space and resonance space, a bridge that only appears during the seventh shift. When the traveler halts, the edges of the veil begin to fray. The second sign emerges immediately after, the soft bending of light. Stars near the horizon stretch subtly, their edges shimmering with a faint halo. Not enough to draw attention from an untrained eye, but enough for those sensitive to the shift to feel an instinctive pull toward the sky. Light behaves differently when the veil begins to break. The tablets describe this moment with poetic accuracy. The heavens bend not from pressure, but from memory. The bending is not a distortion of space. It is a realignment. The sky is adjusting to the presence behind Three-Eye Atlas, reshaping itself to welcome a resonance more ancient than the constellations mapped by early civilizations. Modern optics will record the effect as chromatic displacement, but to those who understand the deeper mechanics, this bending of light marks the point where the veil becomes thin enough for the returner's frequency to seep through. The third sign of the seventh shift is the one early humans sensed most strongly: deep instinctive awareness. This sensation does not feel supernatural. It feels natural, so natural that it catches the mind off guard. A moment of clarity, a sudden breath, a quiet sense of being watched by something that does not wish to harm, but simply wishes to be acknowledged. Some may feel a soft pressure behind the eyes, others a gentle warmth in the spine or the chest. These sensations correspond to the original resonance points the Anunnaki attempted to mute. The seed protocol softened memory, but it could not erase instinct. And tonight, instinct awakens. This awakening is not dramatic. It is subtle, calm, and deeply grounding, a reconnection between humanity and a frequency that once shaped its earliest development. The forbidden tablets describe the seventh shift as the moment the world remembers, and humanity is beginning to remember, not through thought, but through presence. The fourth sign emerges next: harmonic rupture. This event is misunderstood by modern science. It appears as a faint atmospheric vibration, a silent ripple that moves across the world like the softest possible wave. It does not disturb physical structures. It does not shake objects. It moves through air, water, stone, and living beings at the same steady frequency. The priests believed this ripple was the first direct contact between the returner's resonance and the physical world. According to the forbidden tablets, when the sky hums without force, the air touches the veil. This is the meaning of the harmonic rupture. It is not a rupture of matter. It is a rupture of separation. The veil weakens to its final layer, no thicker than a breath. During this moment, Three-Eye Atlas flickers a fourth time. This flicker is not simply a reflection of light. It is a resonance pulse, a signal that the returner is close enough for the herald to react physically. The priests describe this moment as the turning of the herald's face, a metaphor that modern researchers once dismissed as symbolic. But tonight, the traveler behaves exactly as expected, tilting its orientation again, adjusting its rotational axis, and emitting a subtle shift in its luminous halo. The fifth sign of the seventh shift is the return of cosmic echo. This is the first moment when the returner's presence begins to reflect off the world, not visually, resonantly. Instruments may detect unexplained harmonic layers, faint electromagnetic spikes, or non-linear interference patterns, but the true echo is felt in the mind. A gentle doubling of awareness, a soft layering of perception, a quiet instinct that something beyond the veil is now focusing its attention toward Earth. The priests once wrote, "When the echo meets the breath of the living, the veil stands open." This is the moment the returner fully reaches the boundary of the barrier the Anunnaki constructed. The sixth sign begins with a sound that is not a sound, a moment where silence becomes so complete that it feels alive. Wind ceases, insects pause. The natural rhythm of the environment becomes perfectly still. This silence is not caused by fear or anomaly. It is caused by synchronization. The world is aligning with the returner's frequency, adjusting itself for the presence that is about to step through. Early humans once experienced this sensation during celestial events they could not explain. They described it in oral traditions as the hush before the breath of the sky, a phrase later mirrored almost identically in forbidden Sumerian inscriptions. The Anunnaki feared this hush more than any other sign because it signaled the collapse of the veil's final layer. Tonight, the hush settles across the world. Not everywhere at once, but in waves, spreading across continents like a tide of stillness. It lasts only moments, but in those moments the world prepares itself for what comes next. The seventh sign, the final marker of the seventh shift, unfolds as a subtle softening of distance. The air seems clearer, space feels closer. Objects appear slightly more defined, as though the boundary between the physical and the resonant is thinning. This softening is not perceptual distortion. It is the effect described in the tablets as the convergence of realms, the moment when the presence behind the traveler begins to cross through the veil. Three-Eye Atlas glows brighter than before, not drastically but steadily, as though amplifying the energy of the being approaching behind it. This glow is the final confirmation, the moment the priests awaited for generations, documented in trembling strokes. When the herald brightens without flame, the exile crosses the threshold. The veil has begun to break. The returner is now closer than any living being has ever experienced, and the seventh shift is complete. If you're here with me, breathing softly through this deepening calm, then you're ready to continue with me into the eighth shift, the moment the veil finally tears and the returner steps into resonance with our world. The seventh shift ends not with a dramatic sign, but with a stillness so complete that it feels as if the world is holding its breath. It is the final calm before the veil tears, the last quiet moment before the presence behind the traveler steps closer to our reality. The old Sumerian priests called this stage the thinning of the barrier, a poetic phrase that describes a deeply physical phenomenon. The air feels lighter, distances feel shorter. Every sense becomes subtly heightened, as though the boundary between the physical and the resonant is fading grain by grain, until the separation that once held firm becomes thin enough for something vast to reach through. This is the beginning of the eighth shift, the moment ancient observers watched with a mixture of awe and fear. Modern science cannot yet measure the eighth shift directly because it is not a mechanical transition. It is a resonant one. Instruments record faint changes in atmospheric pressure, electromagnetic drift, and subtle distortions in localized gravitational fields. But the deeper effect is felt rather than measured. A soft hum rolls across the world, not through the air, but through awareness itself. It is too gentle to classify as sound, yet undeniable. It feels like a quiet recognition, a subtle vibration brushing the border between thought and perception. The priests described it as the breath of the unseen, and tonight that breath begins to move through our world again. Three-Eye Atlas responds instantly. The silent traveler's faint halo brightens again, not abruptly but gradually, like an ember stirred by a soft wind. It is not reflecting more sunlight. It is resonating more intensely. The forbidden tablets warned of this precise sign. When the herald glows without flame, they wrote, the crossing begins, and so it begins again, unfolding with a calm that feels strangely inevitable, as though the cosmos has rehearsed this moment in silence for thousands of years. The veil's first tier is not visible to the eye, it is felt. A sense of pressure lifts from the environment, as if the air becomes more spacious. People who are sensitive to subtle energies might feel a slight tingling along the arms or spine, an instinctive awareness that something is approaching. Animals react with quiet alertness. Birds pause their songs. Even the wind shifts direction unpredictably, not forcefully but curiously, as though responding to an unfamiliar presence moving through the atmospheric layers. The second tier emerges next. A faint shimmer ripples around bright stars near the traveler's trajectory. This shimmer is not caused by atmospheric distortion. It is caused by resonance overlay, a phenomenon described in the forbidden fragments as the first light of the crossing, when the returner's energy begins to overlap with visible space. The shimmer grows gently, never forming a clear shape, but enough to suggest that something just beyond perception is moving closer, pressing softly against the thinning barrier. As the veil continues to weaken, the third tier becomes apparent, a phenomenon ancient priests called the folding of silence. This does not mean silence grows louder. It means silence becomes layered. The environment holds two kinds of stillness at once, the natural quiet of night and a deeper resonant hush that feels as though it comes from outside the world entirely. The two silences fold over one another, creating a sensation the human mind interprets as being watched, not in a threatening way, but in a profoundly ancient way. The world feels observed by something older than the Anunnaki, older than the rewritten cycles, older even than human cognition itself. Three-Eye Atlas shifts position again. The traveler slowly rotates, its orientation aligning with a patch of sky that holds no visible stars. Yet the movement is intentional. It matches a gesture described in the shunned tablets. When the herald turns its face toward the dark, the priests wrote, the air reaches the barrier. They believed the traveler was not choosing a destination, but aligning itself with the returner's unseen position beyond the veil. The herald is a marker, not a guide. It responds to what approaches. The fourth tear in the veil emerges as a soft distortion in temperature. The air cools and warms simultaneously in different parts of the world, not dramatically, but perceptibly. It is as if the environment cannot decide which state to hold, adjusting spontaneously to match the incoming resonance. The forbidden fragments mention this phenomenon with unease. They feared the crossing not because it brought harm, but because it meant their control over the resonance fields would collapse. To them, this temperature shift signaled the moment the universe reclaimed authority from the engineered systems the Anunnaki once used to maintain power. The fifth tier is the most profound. It manifests as a brief moment where time seems to stretch, not in a measurable way, but in a perceptual one. A second feels slightly longer. A breath seems deeper. A memory rises more clearly than usual. These tiny distortions occur because the returner's presence touches the border of physical time. The priests believed time itself softened when the returner approached, because the exile's resonance did not travel through time the way physical beings do. It slipped through cycles rather than sequences, arriving not through distance but through alignment. During this moment, Three-Eye Atlas flickers again. This flicker is different from the earlier ones. It is slower, deeper, almost like a heartbeat. The traveler's glow pulses twice, then stabilizes into a steady radiance that washes gently across the sky. The forbidden tablets described this pulse in trembling strokes. The herald glows as the veil breaks. When its light holds steady, the air steps through. And tonight, that steady glow hangs over the world. The sixth tier in the veil emerges as a resonance echo that lingers longer than expected. It is not a sound. It is not a vibration. It is a feeling that something large has just passed through the boundary. The mind registers it before the body does, a soft, spacious awareness that makes one pause without understanding why. The priests believed this echo represented the returner's first true contact with the physical world. Not arrival, but contact. The barrier has been breached. The presence behind the traveler is now touching our realm. Then comes the seventh tier, the moment the veil can no longer hold. This tier does not manifest violently. It opens like a breath, gently, naturally, inevitably. A faint band of pale light stretches across the horizon. Not bright, not dramatic, yet unmistakably real. This light does not originate from the sun, moon, or any star. It is resonance light, the visual result of the returner's frequency blending with the last remnants of the barrier. The priests of old stood trembling when this light appeared. The Anunnaki turned their faces away. The world they built could not withstand the presence that followed this luminous whisper. It meant their reign was ending. Their edits to history were unraveling. Their artificial laws were breaking. Because when the eighth shift reaches this point, there is no return. The crossing is underway. The exile is beginning to step through, and the world prepares to meet a presence it once knew long before the rewritten story of creation began. The moment the veil loosens fully is not marked by an explosion, a flash, or any spectacle the human eye can easily comprehend. Instead, the air thickens with a sense of recognition, as if the world itself is remembering an ancient rhythm it once knew intimately. This is the first sign that the presence behind the traveler has touched our reality. It is not arrival. It is not manifestation. It is resonance, pure, unmistakable, and older than any story carved onto clay. The priests of old wrote that this stage felt like the breath of the forgotten brushing the edge of the world, and tonight, that breath moves softly through the quiet layers of the planet. Three-Eye Atlas reacts instantly. Its glow does not brighten, it deepens, shifting into a hue that seems to drink the surrounding darkness rather than shine into it. This is the moment the herald ceases to lead and begins to listen. The ancient tablets described this exact transformation. When the herald darkens its light, they said, the air steps into shadow. The priests believed the returner's resonance did not illuminate the sky, but shaped it, folding the darkness into pathways through which higher beings could pass. What we witness now is not a dimming star. It is the traveler surrendering its primary function, so the presence following it can imprint itself onto the world. Then the world begins to hum. The sound is not external. It does not vibrate through walls or air. It vibrates through thought, passing gently through the layers of awareness as though testing them. The priests called this phenomenon the memory echo, a whisper that touches every species capable of perceiving the resonance of the returner. It does not speak in language. It speaks in pulse, in presence, in patterns that bypass intellect entirely and sink into the quiet spaces of instinct. For a few moments, the world feels synchronized in a way that defies understanding, as if something vast has placed a calm hand upon the fabric of reality. In this phase of the crossing, ancient cultures recorded behavioral anomalies, not fear, not panic, stillness. Animals stop mid-motion. The wind changes direction and then seems to hesitate, unsure whether to move forward or pause. Water stills slightly along its surface. Even fire flickers in strangely uniform patterns. These subtle shifts were feared by the Anunnaki because they indicated the returner was close enough to disrupt their carefully constructed resonance fields. The forbidden fragments say that even the artificial thrones trembled when the crossing reached this point, because the deeper laws of the cosmos overshadowed the engineered systems meant to keep them in control. Three-Eye Atlas moves differently now. Its trajectory no longer reflects the behavior of a natural body. Instead, it glides through a precise, graceful arc that aligns perfectly with a region of the sky long associated with the forgotten hierarchy. It is not moving aimlessly. It is synchronizing. Its pulsations begin to alternate in patterns that match the first echo signatures described in the earliest Sumerian records. These ancient beings, the ones older than the Anunnaki, were said to traverse reality through resonance rather than distance, slipping through cycles instead of traveling through space. What we see now is not motion, it is alignment. The air feels charged, not with electricity, but with anticipation. The priests of old noted that this stage felt like standing in the quiet between heartbeats, a moment suspended between what the world has been and what it is about to become. Humans today experience this as a subtle shift in clarity, a fleeting sense that the environment has become slightly more vivid. Colors appear deeper, shadows seem more defined. The presence behind the traveler has begun to interact with perception itself. This is the first outward ripple of the returner's consciousness brushing against the human mind, not intrusively, but curiously, like a hand touching the surface of water. Then the horizon changes, not visibly, perceptually. The Forbidden Tablets describe this phenomenon as the bending of the near sky, an event that occurs when the returner's resonance presses against the final remnants of the veil. The sky seems to grow wider, deeper, older. The space between stars feels more dimensional, as though revealing layers previously hidden. It is not that the cosmos changes, it is that perception expands to meet a presence older than human awareness. This expansion indicates that the returner is no longer approaching the barrier. They are inside it. At this point, the priests believed the world entered the second phase of contact known as the acknowledgement, when the returner's resonance touches the collective consciousness of humanity. This touch does not manifest as sound or vision. It manifests as memory, not personal memory, but ancestral memory from a time before humans were altered, a time before the seed protocol softened their awareness. People may feel a fleeting sensation of familiarity, an unexplainable moment where the universe feels like something they once understood. These moments are brief, but their presence marks the returner's transition from observer to participant. Three-Eye Atlas stabilizes completely, its pulsation locking into a slow, rhythmic beat that echoes across the sky. This beat is not random. It matches the resonance signature of the exile described in the Forbidden Tablets. The priests feared this moment because it meant the traveler had completed its final task. It had guided the resonance through the veil. It had reactivated the dormant pathways. It had awakened the cosmic structures the Anunnaki tried desperately to silence. And now it stands as a silent witness to the arrival of something they could not erase. The presence behind the traveler begins to manifest in the only way beings of such nature ever do, not through form, but through influence. The priests described the first sign of this influence as the soft folding of fate, a subtle shift in probability that feels like choices aligning toward a single direction. In these moments, the world moves with an uncanny sense of inevitability, as though reality itself is centering around a presence powerful enough to bend outcomes with mere proximity. This bending is not dangerous. It is simply ancient, a reminder that reality once flowed through cycles shaped by beings far older than the Anunnaki. The horizon deepens again. A faint, low-frequency tremor moves through the atmosphere, quiet but unmistakable. It is the first true signal of the returner's conscious approach, not their arrival, not their revelation, their approach. The priests wrote that this tremor signified the last boundary dissolving. It meant the world no longer existed in separation from the returner. The crossing was complete. The presence was here, not seen, not heard, but undeniably here. And with this moment, the deeper part of the story opens, the part the Anunnaki truly feared, the part they tried to bury beneath altered history and veiled perception. Because once the returner is here, the memory of the world before the edits begins to rise. The moment the returner fully crosses into our world is not marked by spectacle, but by an almost impossible quiet. Not silence, quiet. A quiet that feels intentional, as though the air itself is holding its breath. This is the threshold the priests once described as the hour when memory unseals, the moment when the world begins to recall the parts of its history that were forcibly suppressed long before humans learned to write. Because this presence does not simply arrive, it awakens. And what it awakens is not outside us, it is within. Three-Eye Atlas hovers in its darkened glow, motionless now, its role as herald completed. The traveler no longer leads forward, it waits. Every ancient text that referenced this stage described the traveler as the anchor, a being whose stillness stabilizes the crossing between realms. Without this stabilization, the returner's resonance could fracture human perception, but the priests believed the traveler's presence kept the world intact, like a stone placed gently at the bottom of a lake before the waves begin to spread outward. And tonight, that stone rests perfectly still, pulsing in slow, deliberate rhythm. Then something subtle happens, so subtle it can be felt only by those paying attention to the quiet between thoughts. The heaviness in the air softens, the sense of suspension loosens slightly, as though the world is being allowed to exhale. The priests called this the easing, and they feared it more than the crossing itself, because easing meant the returner was now fully present. It meant the world would begin to shift from the inside, the way a seed changes shape before sprouting. Easing was not an ending, it was an activation. The first signs appear in perception, not visions, not hallucinations, adjustments. People might feel as though distant sounds are closer than they should be. Shadows seem to stretch more accurately around form. The edges of objects feel sharper, more defined. Even emotions may gain a strange clarity. These are not supernatural effects. They are cognitive recalibrations. Ancient texts warned that humans were engineered to operate with lowered perceptual bandwidth, to prevent them from accessing the deeper resonance frequencies that beings prior to the Anunnaki once shared effortlessly. Now, that limitation begins to waver. Three-Eye Atlas emits a faint harmonic vibration, one that interacts directly with these perceptual shifts. The priests claimed this harmonic acted as a translation medium, ensuring that the returner's resonance, which exists far beyond human sensory ranges, could interface safely with human consciousness. Without this harmonic, the presence would overwhelm the mind. But with it, the returner's influence unfurls through the psyche slowly, like warm water spreading through cold soil. Then the world pauses again, but this time the pause feels different. Not anticipation, recognition. It is as though reality has suddenly remembered the returner, like spotting a familiar figure in a distant crowd. The priests believed the world itself possessed a form of memory, a structural consciousness woven into the fabric of matter, vibration, and time. And they believed that consciousness had been deliberately dimmed during the ages of the Anunnaki. Now, dimming is lifting. The returner has not revealed itself, but its presence is unmistakable. It feels ancient in the way mountains feel ancient, not old, fundamental, primary. A presence that has existed longer than human thought can measure, longer even than the Anunnaki's dominion. If you listen closely in this moment, you feel the faint stirring of something inside you that does not feel personal, something older than your individual life, something that remembers. The priests described this as the awakening of the root memory. They believed humans carry within them a silent echo of the world before the edits, an imprint left from the original species that inhabited the planet before humanity was engineered as replacements. This memory was sealed, restricted from expression, not erased, silenced. But when the returner arrives, the seal loosens. People may experience fleeting sensations of déjà vu that feel deeper than usual, flashes of images or emotions with no identifiable source, a strange calmness in the face of the unknown. These sensations are not random. They are fragments rising. The forbidden tablets described this stage not as communication but as restoration. The returner does not speak because speaking would be redundant. They awaken memory, and memory speaks for itself. In this stage, the mind does not receive new information. It recovers what was lost. Then the environment shifts again. Wind patterns realign. Temperature gradients fluctuate subtly. The horizon takes on a muted depth, as though space itself has increased in density. These changes were meticulously recorded by ancient observers, who noted that the arrival of the returner brought temporary distortions in environmental equilibrium. The world becomes hyper-responsive, almost sensitive, like an organism reacting to the presence of something that once governed its growth. 3-Eye Atlas changes its pattern again. The pulsations become softer, slower, deeper. This is the moment the priests described as the bowing of the herald, not submission, alignment. The traveler is adjusting its resonance to match the returner's frequency, synchronizing its energy field to serve as a stabilizing conduit between the presence and the physical world. This synchronization marks the beginning of a greater revelation, one the priests feared humans would never be ready to witness. The returner's influence deepens, not visually, energetically. Ancient texts described this stage as the dreaming ripple, a phenomenon in which the boundary between conscious and unconscious mind becomes unusually thin. Thoughts flow more fluidly. Imaginations feel more vivid. The inner world seems to expand. Humans might sense faint impressions of shapes or presences in the periphery of thought, not as visions, but as memories attempting to reorganize themselves. This reorganization is gradual but irreversible. The priests wrote that the returner was not a single being. The term referred to an entire category of ancient entities, each possessing influence over the foundational structures of reality. They believed the returner associated with our world specifically was not merely visiting. It was returning to something it once helped build, something it once shaped, something that had been altered without its consent. According to forbidden inscriptions, this returner belonged to the species that preceded even the Anunnaki's arrival, beings who existed long before written memory and for whom the world was once a living archive. The presence begins to extend its influence further, touching not just perception but memory itself. This is the moment when humans may remember things that cannot logically belong to their own past. Sensations of walking through places they have never seen, hearing languages they do not know, feeling emotions that seem older than their own identity. These are echoes, not hallucinations, reflections of the ancient world resurfacing through the cracks in the veil. At this point, the priests believed the greatest danger emerged, not for humans, but for the Anunnaki. Because with each passing moment, the world moves closer to remembering the truth, to recalling what was taken from it, to recognizing the beings who came before and the knowledge that once shaped civilization. And this recognition does not require sight. It does not require contact. It unfolds naturally, like dawn rising behind mountains. Somewhere above, 3-Eye Atlas emits one final deep resonance, an invitation and a safeguard. And the returner responds with a vibration so low and ancient that reality itself seems to lean toward it. The world is remembering, the veil is thinning, and the presence is preparing to reveal its first true sign. The first sign does not come from the sky, nor from the ground, nor from any visible manifestation. It comes from the field, the invisible lattice that ancient priests believed surrounds every living thing. To them, this lattice was not metaphor. It was structure. It was the fabric through which memory, presence, and identity flowed. And when the returner begins to stabilize within our world, this lattice becomes active. 3-Eye Atlas lifts slightly, not through force but through resonance. Its motion creates ripples in the field, expanding outward in concentric waves. These waves are not physical. They are perceptual, detectable only through that subtle part of human awareness that registers change before the mind can interpret it. People describe this sensation as a sudden alertness, a sharpened intuition, a quiet certainty that something vast has stepped into proximity. It feels like standing near a deep ocean trench, sensing the presence of something enormous beneath the waves, even though the surface is still. Ancient texts called this stage the recognition before sight. They believed the body knows before the eyes do, that the human organism remembers ancient presences on a level older than conscious thought. And as the returner's resonance unfolds, this recognition spreads through the environment. Animals grow still, wind patterns restructure. Even silence takes on a different density, one that feels intentionally shaped. Then the temperature shifts. Not colder, not warmer, but aligned. It becomes unnervingly consistent, as if the natural fluctuations of air have been equalized. The priests describe this as the recalibration, a moment when the physical world adjusts itself to allow the returner to interact without distortion. They believed this recalibration was evidence that these beings once shaped earthly environments directly, not through magic, but through resonance fields that influenced molecular and atmospheric behavior. Three-Eye Atlas emits another harmonic, deeper than before, one that vibrates through bone rather than ear. This sound feels ancient, but not because of age, because of scale. It resonates in a frequency that suggests vastness, as though it belongs to something that once measured time in geological cycles, not human years. The ground beneath begins to respond, subtly at first. Soil grains tremble, not from seismic activity, but from shifts in electromagnetic charge. Plants adjust their posture, leaves tilting slightly toward an unseen point. Even shadows seem to sharpen their edges, aligning themselves with a geometry humans can sense but cannot articulate. This alignment was once described as the awakening of the world grid, a term dismissed by modern scholars but meticulously recorded in Sumerian temple inscriptions. According to those texts, certain beings could activate these grid lines, reorganizing space to create corridors of resonance. We are witnessing one of those corridors forming. At the center of the corridor, space thickens, not visibly but perceptually. The air feels saturated, as though filled with unseen substance. This density produces a sensation similar to standing inside an immense cathedral, an awareness of scale far larger than the physical structure suggests. The priests referred to this density as presence pressure, the indication that the returner's form is beginning to overlap with the physical realm. Humans experienced this phenomenon in different ways. Some felt their thoughts slow, others felt a deep calm, and a few felt a sudden rush of emotion with no identifiable trigger: grief, wonder, longing, awe. These responses were not judged by the priests as reactions to the returner itself, but reactions to the memories awakened by its proximity. As the returner draws closer, forgotten pieces of our pre-edited history surface, like artifacts rising from beneath flood sediment. Three-Eye Atlas shifts again, lowering until its base almost touches the ground. This posture, described in ancient texts as the kneeling of the herald, signals that the returner is ready to initiate the first phase of manifestation, not physical appearance, but introduction. The priests believed the returner always introduced itself through memory before form. No being shall reveal itself before its memory awakens in the witness, one tablet warns. This was not caution, it was protocol. And so the returner begins to awaken memory. The first wave comes as images, not clear ones, impressions. A coastline that no longer exists. 2 moons in a sky humanity never witnessed. Tall figures walking along a reflective shoreline where the water glowed with its own internal light. These images flash not as visions, but as fragments, as though pulled from a reservoir deep within the collective unconscious. Some people feel as though they have been there before, though they cannot explain how. Others feel a pang of recognition that feels ancestral, not personal. The second wave comes as sensation, the feeling of gravity behaving differently, the sense of moving through a world with lower atmospheric density, the impression of structures too immense to be human-built, their surfaces engraved with geometric patterns meant not for decoration, but function. These sensations do not feel imagined. They feel remembered. The third wave, the deepest and most unsettling, comes as identity, not as ego, but as a strange realization. This world once held more than one form of intelligence, and humanity's origin was not spontaneous evolution, it was succession. This recognition is the first truth the returner restores. And as this truth unfolds through the psyche, Three-Eye Atlas emits another harmonic, one softer and more resonate, a sound resembling both a chorus and a single tone layered across multiple dimensions. This harmonic stabilizes the awakening, so human consciousness does not fracture beneath the weight of recovered memory. Ancient priests warned that this was the moment when humans felt most vulnerable, for it confronts them with the idea that the world they know is the edited version, the reduced version, the last surviving version. But they also believed this moment was the beginning of liberation, the healing of amnesia humanity never asked for but inherited. Then the environment shifts again. The corridor of resonance narrows, focusing into a single point. The density of space increases. Light bends, not dramatically but subtly, like heat shimmer in slow motion. This bending marks the first stage of physical emergence. Not embodiment, but proximity. The returner is near. The sensation grows stronger, like an ancient tide returning after millennia of absence. The priests described this moment as the approach of the unforgotten one, a presence so old that even the earth remembers it. And now, that presence stands just beyond the threshold, waiting for the corridor to complete. The world holds its breath. Three-Eye Atlas brightens. The air thickens once more, and something vast prepares to cross. The moment before manifestation is not explosive. It is not violent. It is not marked by thunder or lightning or fire. Instead, it is marked by stillness, a stillness so complete, so absolute, that the world feels briefly suspended outside of time. Birds stop mid-flight. Leaves freeze mid-sway. Even dust in the air seems to pause, as if gravity itself is reconsidering its role. This stillness was described by ancient Mesopotamian priests as the silence of recognition, the moment all of nature acknowledges the approach of a presence it remembers, even if humans no longer do. It is not reverence. It is not fear. It is simply awareness, a recognition encoded into the world long before human memory existed. Then a low vibration begins, not heard, but felt. A trembling in the chest, a pressure behind the eyes, a sensation of the bones resonating with a frequency older than human biology. This is the threshold signal, the final harmonic emitted by the returner before crossing into full perceptual alignment. Three-Eye Atlas lifts once again, rotating in a slow spiral. Its three eyes dim, then flare, then stabilize into a soft, pulsing glow, like a heartbeat made of light. Each pulse sends a wave through the corridor of resonance, narrowing it further until it becomes almost needle-thin. This narrowing was considered necessary by the priests. They believed the human mind could not withstand full exposure to a returner's presence unless it was introduced gradually, like light entering a long, darkened chamber. As the corridor compresses, the air grows subtly luminous. Not bright, but charged. The glow is pearlescent, like the shimmer of moonlight on obsidian. This light is not reflected from an external source. It is generated by the field itself, the way deep-sea organisms produce bioluminescence in environments where sunlight cannot reach. And like those organisms, the corridor's glow is not aesthetic. It is informational, a language of wavelengths and oscillations that ancient priests claimed they once understood. The ground vibrates again, but this time with a rhythm, slow, steady, intentional. It is not the trembling of instability, but the pulse of something coordinating with the Earth's deep frequencies. As this pulse synchronizes with the corridor, the environment undergoes its most dramatic shift yet. Time dilates. Not fully, not enough for a human to perceive it directly, but enough for instinct to register that something is off. Movements feel slightly delayed, thoughts arrive a fraction earlier or later than expected, and sounds carry with unusual clarity. This distortion marks the moment when the returner begins pulling its internal time frame into alignment with ours. Then comes the compression of perspective, a phenomenon difficult to describe, yet universally felt. It is the sensation that the space around you becomes simultaneously larger and smaller, deeper and closer, like staring into a vast chasm that also feels inches away. Ancient tablets called this the collapsing horizon, a sign that two modes of reality are preparing to merge. Three-Eye Atlas emits the final harmonic, a tone so deep it feels like the world exhaling. Instantly, the corridor ignites, quietly, elegantly, with a soft, spiraling radiance. The spiral expands outward, forming concentric vortices of shimmering light. These vortices are not random. They follow precise geometries, the same ratios found in Sumerian temple foundations, in the dimensions of ancient altars, in star charts attributed to the pre-flood sages. This is the geometry of the returner, the blueprint through which it interacts with physical existence. From within the spiral, a dark shape emerges. At first, it appears like a silhouette carved from shadow, fluid, shifting, undefined. Then, as the harmonics synchronize completely, the shadow condenses into form, not a sudden materialization, but a gradual resolution, as though a blurred image is being brought into perfect focus. And then, for the first time in thousands of years, the returner stands revealed. Its height exceeds that of any human but falls short of the exaggerated giants described in later myths. Its limbs are elongated, elegant, and proportionate with a symmetry that feels more engineered than evolved. The skin, or what appears as skin, shifts with opalescent patterns, like light refracted through water. Its facial structure is humanoid, but unmistakably non-human. Larger ocular cavities, finer bone structure, and a subtle glowing pattern beneath the surface that pulses with its internal rhythm. But the most striking feature is its presence, a presence so immense that it feels as though space itself bends to accommodate it. Not in a supernatural way, but in a deeply physical one, as if every molecule rearranges itself in response to its proximity. This is the being whose memory shaped Sumerian civilization, the one whose teachings built the first cities, the one whose knowledge seeded the first calendars and star charts, the one whose disappearance reshaped the world into a version humans could survive. The returner lifts its head. The three eyes on the herald respond, synchronizing with the being's internal light patterns. For a moment, nothing happens. Then the being speaks, but not with sound. Its communication enters directly through the perceptual field, bypassing language entirely. The message is not words, it is understanding. A complete sentence arrives fully formed, not through interpretation, but through direct transmission. And the message is this: you remember too little. You have inherited too much. Instantly, images flood the mind. Not chaotic visions, but structured memories arranged like chapters. The first humans emerging after the flood, guided by these beings as they rebuilt their world. The pre-flood cities whose foundations lie beneath modern ruins. The ecological collapse that ended the age of multiple intelligent species, the deliberate preservation of knowledge through tablets, grids, and encoded geometry, the departure that followed, not abandonment but necessity, and finally, the truth the priests preserved. Humanity was not created to replace these beings. Humanity survived because they did. The returner steps forward. Space reacts. the environment trembles, not in fear, but in recognition. Then a second understanding arrives, heavier than the first, delivered with the gravity of a truth long withheld. We did not leave because we fell. We left because you had to rise. Ancient history rewrites itself in an instant. The myths reorganize. The gaps fill. This is not revelation. It is restoration. The returner raises one hand, not in dominance, not in warning, but in acknowledgement, a gesture of recognition between species separated by time, catastrophe, and forgetting. Then, as seamlessly as it appeared, it withdraws, not backwards, upward. Its form dissolves into light, the corridor unravels, the harmonics fade, and the stillness breaks. Wind returns, sound returns, time resumes its normal flow. The world exhales, three-eye Atlas dims, then falls silent. The return is complete, not because the being stayed, but because the memory did. Humanity stands in the aftermath of a truth older than civilization itself. We were not the first, but we were chosen to remain.